cold wind howled around the abandoned shabby house, as if trying to tear the last warmth from the ruins. Sarasa froze before the boarded-up door and realized in confusion this ruin was her new home. And just recently she had joyfully trembled in a cart for a whole month, nurturing a dream of her own shop, on the recommendation of the master. Warm memories of carefree days with friends flashed before her eyes like a whirlwind. In their world, alchemists were the true elite. Demand for potions guaranteed them respect and prosperous years. Such a profession could only be obtained at the magnificent royal school. For a poor orphan, it was the only ticket to a better life. The institution taught talented commoners for free and paid them a scholarship. Sarasa walked forward confidently. Surviving there was a real trial. Due to fierce competitions with aristocrats and endless exams, less than 10% graduated. But Sarasa Fid did go through this hell, and today she became a graduate. No exalted emotions or tears of happiness, only quiet, exhausted joy that the ordeal was finally over. At 8 years old, she lost her parents, and for years hid from the harsh reality of the shelter behind continuous cramming. Having lost her parents at 8, she hid for years in the shelter from the harsh reality, defending herself with continuous cramming. They didn't even let her rejoice over the diploma. Just yesterday, the girl was taking exams, and today she already had to pack her suitcases, sincerely outraged by such a crazy schedule. Sarasa mentally reviewed her path, leaving the shelter, exhausting studies, admission to the academy, working as a journeyman, and the long-awaited chest with 5 million coins. She was almost glowing with pride. The collected sum was 10 times the annual income of an ordinary commoner, and the lion's share of this wealth she saved precisely from side jobs. Walking along the path, she admitted to herself, without a job in the mistress's shop, such capital would be nothing but a dream. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarasa smiled nervously. The path to graduation had been incredibly difficult for her. Ophelia Millis appeared ahead, a prominent capital alchemist, and alongside her walked her unchanging mistress. Sarasa sincerely thanked her for the support, but still could not understand why Ophelia had not changed her age for 5 years in a row. When the conversation turned to exams, Sarasa bitterly admitted she was always placed third, while the top places were taken by the noble audience. Ophelia indulgently shook her head and explained that influential aristocrats simply inflated their own scores. The mistress sighed heavily and squinted thoughtfully, as if weighing every word, and then calmly said, supposedly, in terms of real knowledge, Sarasa was the best student of the entire course. Ophelia sincerely laughed at the pride of the aristocrats, and Sarasa just shrugged. The main thing was that their machinations did not gnaw into her cash bonus. The mistress laughed and tousled her hair. School grades were worth nothing anymore. And, inspired, Sarasa immediately asked to be excused to buy the long-awaited Encyclopedia of Alchemy. Sarasa hesitantly admitted to her mentor that she really wanted to buy the Encyclopedia of Alchemy. This 10-volume set contained absolutely all the secrets of their craft. The mentor calmly sipped her tea and replied that the book was easy to find in the school store. The girl happily began to estimate the price, but the market value, 7.5 million rear, almost knocked her off her feet. The master craftswoman slyly offered her help and a discount down to 5 million, but Sarasa instantly realized, for that money, you could still buy an entire house. Then the mentor explained, this book is a magical artifact, and the pages look completely blank to ordinary people. The higher the mage's level, from novice to true master, the more volumes he can read. That is why verifying the authenticity of the purchase is extremely difficult. So it is necessary to hire experienced alchemists for unheard-of commissions. Sarasa imagined with horror how she would beg tearfully for a favor and hand over a bag of money to some creepy mage appraiser. But she proudly exhaled. 5 years of strict saving had not been in vain, and even the mentor was sincerely impressed by such determination. As soon as they entered the store, the saleswoman brought out a giant stack of books and hesitantly asked if the graduate needed a local quality guarantee. Instead of doubts, Sarasa nodded triumphantly and with a broad smile at her mentor. The woman smiled indulgently, then calmly turned the pages of the expensive folio. For her, this check was a mere trifle. The seal fell on the paper with a dull thud. The friendly clerk handed over the ready certificate. Sarasa beamed. Being a top-class alchemist is no joke, Mentor Ophelia explained evenly, without haste. The lion's share of school fees goes to them. The girl quickly calculated the numbers. That's work worth 250 million. But dreams of wealth shattered as soon as the saleswoman named her own check, 500 million. With trembling hands, Sarasa barely pushed a huge sack of coins onto the counter, what she had gathered with her blood and sweat over 5 years of hard labor. The woman happily thanked her for the purchase, while the girl choked on bitter tears over lost savings. So, Ophelia interrupted her suffering. She noticed, usually graduates only take the first 3 volumes, and immediately asked, how does Sarasa even plan to carry all 10? Just nearby, a mountain of thick folios grew, and the girl involuntarily froze in horror at their dimensions. She panicked, not imagining how to lift them, and the mentor smiled and handed her a leather backpack. It was her graduation gift. A magical bag that expands space and removes weight, so the heavy library on her back became unnoticeable. Sarasa almost jumped from shock, realizing the value of the gifted equipment, but the woman just winked. She made everything herself. The mentor explained that she had endowed the bag with protection against thieves, and to change its owner, one would have to work hard. Having placed the heavy folios on her shoulders, Sarasa felt amazed. With the mentor's magical bag, they became almost weightless. Then, they slowly set off through the city to the next stop. Later, an elderly woman in glasses warmly thanked the girl for her diligent work and asked her to come again. Sarasa stopped, and a soft smile slid across her face as she nodded goodbye. Together with her mentor, they briskly opened the massive doors. A small pause. Just a breath and silence. A confident step forward. At the counter, they were met by an energetic administrator, and Sarasa hesitantly asked if there were free spots for training. The mentor looked around the empty hall in surprise, and she was explained. Today, everyone went to celebrate the graduation ceremony. Sarasa was trembling with impatience. She suddenly leaned on the table and blurted out, "Show me the list of requirements for candidates." The senior companion smiled as she recalled how she once loudly celebrated her own graduation with friends. It hit a sore spot. With tears in her eyes, Sarasa puffed her cheeks and hid behind a thick reference book. She had no one to celebrate with. Sarasa timidly asked to see the available shops. The mentor thoughtfully touched her chin. The woman quickly flipped through the pages of the directory, as if not hearing the student's surprised question. With a loud slap, she hit the table. The perfect offer had already ripened in her mind. In the picture stood a huge house with an alchemical cauldron for a ridiculous 10,000. The girl immediately realized it was a trap. Such crazy subsidies are only thrown out for absolute backwaters. The mentor's finger confidently poked at the map, a tiny village near the sea of trees, a whole month of rattling there by carriage. In panic, Sarasa began shaking the woman wildly by the shoulders. Without clients, she would instantly lose all her savings. But the mentor just carelessly waved it off. She was too sure that the experience of the yesterday's graduate would be more than enough. The girl stared confusedly at the mentor, unable to grasp the hint about her alchemical level. Hearing her third alchemist level mentioned, Sarasa froze in confusion. The woman leaned in very close and quietly asked if the girl at least knew how skill mastery is increased. The answer turned out to be surprisingly simple. She had to personally create absolutely every item from that encyclopedia. Sarasa's eyes widened in shock. It turned out that without noticing, she had already completely covered the first 2 volumes. The mentor smiled warmly and announced that Sarasa was fully ready to open her own shop. She stamped the papers, while the girl panically denied any involvement in trade. The woman clearly laid out the earning scheme and assured the ward of a life without poverty. Everything turned out to be simple. The student would supply rare ingredients, and the mentor would buy them. Sarasa suddenly went pale, sensing treachery in this plan. She decided to take this challenge as a new training. Next to the majestic town hall, the teacher handed her a land contract, cheerfully brushing off the student's shock. The girl sighed resignedly and surrendered without resistance. The mentor winked. If Sarasa failed but without debts, she would take her back to work. The insurance worked. The young alchemist clenched her fists decisively, determined to run her own business. In the evening, lanterns lit up the courtyard. Friends arranged a lavish dinner in honor of the graduation. Sarasa was embarrassed by the sudden preparation, but the teacher waved it off, saying all the food was prepared not by just anyone, but by the maid Maria. The celebration quickly gained momentum. During the banquet, Sarasa enjoyed the delicacies, and at the same time could not hold back. She scolded the mentor for extravagance and reminded her of her own lessons on strict economy. Sarasa stared in shock at the huge roasted bird and froze. She learned that such luxurious banquets were an absolute norm for masters. She burst out in indignation. The mentor herself had taught her to economize diligently, and now she just waved it off, saying that after the exams one could let loose. Sarasa broke out in a cold sweat while the mistress awkwardly justified that supposedly it was not necessary to buy all 10 volumes of the alchemical reference at once. Sarasa horrifiedly calculated. The money spent would have been enough for several houses, and she nearly fainted at the very thought of it. It turned out that one could take only the first 5 with a discount, although the full set was still more cost-effective. But the thought of the crazy expenses would not leave the girl. She almost cried over her stuffed backpack, desperately regretting every day of strict economizing. The conversation shifted to the content of the final volume, and the mentor suddenly blurted out that its authors were complete idiots. Sarasa blinked in confusion. It turned out that most of the recipes in that thick book were useless, just not worth spending money on. The girl could not understand. Then how was it even possible to realistically reach the highest master rank? The woman playfully squinted and whispered that it was a secret. She promised to tell everything later, but for now handed the student a glass of alcohol, saying, "Celebrate your coming of age and successful exam." But the festive mood melted instantly. Having just arrived in a distant province on the mentor's advice, Sarasa fell to her knees in despair before her new shop, a half-ruined shack overgrown with weeds. The chapter ended with a gloomy shot. Her new possession, a lonely half-ruined hut, drowning in weeds on the edge of the wilderness. Before graduation, the mentor insisted that she could give her a warm place in her shop, but the girl stubbornly chose an independent path. And finally, she reached the dreamed-of store. But at the site, an abandoned, weed-covered hut awaited her. All that remained was to sigh heavily. Naive gratitude instantly burned out in the flame of burning indignation. She desperately tried to justify the teacher. She simply could not know the real condition of the building. Wiping away tears, the girl resolutely clenched her fist and prepared to soberly assess the scale of the problem. Although in her memory, the sly image of the mentor stubbornly influenced her, as if she mockingly stuck out her tongue at her. The young alchemist scrutinized the shabby facade with the tilted sign. The frames and doors turned out to be unexpectedly sturdy. Moreover, the walls themselves held firmly, as if they did not know fatigue. Suddenly her step broke off. Full of determination, the girl cheerfully decided, for a start, it was time to get to work inside her new shop. The girl's eye flashed, as if stars lit up inside, and she suddenly realized she was standing on a real treasure. Right under her feet, hidden in the wild grass, grew a valuable medicinal plant. Sarasa carelessly pulled out weeds in front of the old shop, calculating the profit from free herbs, until a surprised exclamation sounded behind her back. The girl froze. Suddenly embraced by a stranger's attention and fear, the girl grew cold inside. To the stranger, her appearance clearly looked suspicious. A short, awkward silence hung between them. The local woman explained confusedly that the store had long been closed, and Sarasa proudly cut in. From now on, this is her home. Silence again hung in the air for a moment. The stranger slowly, as if chewing over what she heard again and again, tried to gather her thoughts together. Sarasa quickly recovered, and nervously, yet still loudly, greeted her. She sharply tugged her skirt and clicked her boots, standing at attention. The woman smiled warmly, introduced herself as neighbor Els, and immediately guessed that the new owner was an alchemist. The girl nodded happily, modestly admitting that she was still a novice in this matter. The tension finally subsided. Sarasa mentally sighed with relief and triumphantly noted, the first impression was not spoiled. Suddenly, Els' gaze slid over the surrounding thickets, and she meaningfully extended her "by the way." The kind woman smiled warmly and invited the young alchemist to visit if she ever needed help. She pointed to a distant path, immediately warning, "The way there is not close at all." While the girl was calculating in her mind how else she could earn money, her companion suddenly asked if she knew the reason for the shop's closure. Doubts gnawed from within. If the business turned out to be unprofitable tomorrow, she would have to quickly come up with a rescue plan. There was no secret. The old owner was let down by his back, and the worried son immediately took him home. But the new mistress would not be left without work. Local gatherers regularly need medicinal potions, so demand is guaranteed. The girl's imagination, moment by moment, painted mountains of cheap, raw materials, but she timely came down from the heavens to earth. The collected still needed processing. If you gather too many materials, they will simply rot due to lack of labor. When the woman asked about the opening date, the confused owner asked for at least a week for general cleaning. At parting, the interlocutor sincerely rejoiced that Alchemy was returning to the village and offered to contact her with any problems. Encouraged by the support of the new acquaintance, the girl set off back to her shop. After a half-hour journey, she finally opened the door of the new establishment and stood frozen in surprise on the threshold. Inside, it was surprisingly clean. With a loud creak, the girl opened the massive door. Half an hour of exhausting loot gathering finally ended. She sighed with relief over the pile of spoils. Inside, she froze in surprise. The room turned out to be remarkably clean, not a speck of dust. The theory of alchemy surfaced in her memory. Small artifacts are brewed in a cauldron, while massive items require special ink and a magical seal. Could the cleansing seal have worked here? A guess flashed, as if the answer winked at her. She remembered her teacher's workshop. There, a similar core was embedded directly into the wall. This thought could not tolerate delay. It had to be checked immediately. The girl set off along the long corridor with excitement. She methodically combed through the entire floor, the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, until in the studio she came across a large magical core in the shape of a glowing mirror. But as soon as she opened the first door, she was met only by dark emptiness. There was nothing in the storeroom either, except bare shelves. Instead, the open kitchen with a brick stove looked much more promising. The girl stopped before the massive doors and decided to inspect the workshop last. She had always been proud of her huge mana reserve. Once she had used it to sustain the core in the former master's shop, but now she was almost torn apart by shock. The magical system of the new house absorbed half of the reserve and did not even replenish it back. Exhaustedly sighing, the new mistress realized with surprise that she had accidentally turned on the anti-theft function as well. Casting aside thoughts about complex rooms, she switched with relief to household matters. Finally, this was her own home, so today only cleaning remained. But as soon as she inspected the second floor, the alchemist fell to the floor in disappointment among 8 completely empty rooms. The only truly useful find turned out to be an old cauldron in the workshop. After cleaning, it was perfect for work. She sincerely did not understand where all the furniture had gone, and naively assumed that it was simply given away to some newlyweds. What truly surprised her was that the entire furnishing was taken out of the house, since usually at least part is left during a move. Suddenly, a lightning-fast guess. The girl rushed headlong down the stairs. Throwing the backpack right on the floor, she decided the temporary bedroom would be here, without unnecessary ceremonies. Then her mood climbed again, thanks to the found bathtub, which was critically needed after dirty experiments. But the enthusiasm did not last long. Without a magical heater, she would have to spend a lot of money on ordinary firewood. She happily clenched her fists. The bathroom immediately added a few points of mood to this house. With a smile on her face, the girl opened the last door slightly. Before going out to the backyard, she was filled with pure delight. But as soon as she stepped outside, in place of the neat garden with herbs, impenetrable wild thickets awaited her. She had to sit down and make a list of the most necessary things, from a bucket to a bed, and even to dishes. By the door, she stopped her neighbor Els, who was holding a basket of vegetables. The girl waved to her warmly. The woman offered help, but the heroine really just needed to find a furniture store. The answer struck a blow to her hopes. Such things are not sold in the village. Everything would have to be ordered from a carpenter and a blacksmith. Els thoughtfully touched her lips, considering whether the craftsman would agree to take on such work. The realization of rural realities slowly dawned on the girl. She sighed resignedly. You won't find metropolitan luxury here, so hard days of economy lie ahead. The woman puffed out her cheeks amusingly and began to concentrate on mentally running through a plan of action. The girl cautiously asked if the woman could tell her exactly where to look for the needed store. The girl timidly asked again if it would cause trouble, and the woman agreed with a broad smile to show the way. They set off along the path, step by step, without haste. As soon as a village appeared ahead, the conductor boldly struck her chest and volunteered. she would personally introduce the guests to the locals. She said that there was only one shop serving the entire settlement here. It was run by a married couple, and their daughter Lorea often stood behind the counter. There was simply no one else to trade here anymore. A massive tiled roof emerged from behind the tree crowns, and in a moment, the very building of the shop appeared before them. The girl gasped with admiration. The size of this 3-story giant completely overshadowed her own modest little shop. Entering the village shop filled with goods, she saw a friendly young saleswoman already greeting her from behind the counter. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing hum sounded. Behind the counter of the cozy shop, a sweet saleswoman greeted them, a joyful smile and a warm welcome, just like at home. Sarasa entered the village shop, where the talkative Lorea busied herself questioning her, lively, with the same curiosity that was hard to escape with a glance. Sarasa awkwardly poked herself with a finger. She could not understand how, in such modest clothing, she could be considered city. Lorea even clenched her fist. She meant something completely different from clothing. The girl looked at the guest with shining eyes, openly admiring her. Lorea enthusiastically insisted that the guest was a true capital lady and could not get enough of it. Suddenly, the voice of the elders interrupted the conversation. Lorea was sent to work, and Sarasa awkwardly apologized for the noise. She smiled faintly and decided not to touch on the truth about the capital's slums and poverty. Lorea conspiratorially offered to add a few small items to the purchase for free. Sarasa decided without hesitation. A large basin and a blanket were needed. Lorea, barely suppressing her delight, immediately obligingly inquired what exactly the guests needed and promised a favorable price. She was immediately shown cheaper wooden versions of basins. The girl fell silent for a moment, gradually realizing the trick of this homemade village. They did not keep ready-made blankets here, only raw materials, which were usually taken by local craftswomen. But that was not a problem. Sarasa recalled old sewing lessons at the orphanage and confidently set about sewing the blanket herself. The memory of the shelter and the warm blanket she once sewed together with the caregiver suddenly warmed her soul. A few minutes of shopping, and the wooden tub, fabric, and dishes were already ready for dispatch. Sarasa guiltily folded her palms and asked the young assistant to take the purchases to the shop without her. This basic set should be enough for the first days. She sincerely marveled at the local kindness. In the capital, after such a thing, they would simply slam the door right in your face. Waving goodbye to the girl, Sarasa set off further, together with an older woman named Els. Lorea beamed with a smile and finally asked Sarasa to return to the shop any time, except perhaps not on a foolish night. They approached an unremarkable hut, and Els immediately began calling for the owner. Her ringing voice echoed loudly over the empty yard. Sarasa blinked in confusion, not believing her own luck. A small yard cluttered with logs, and it was the local workshop. A burly carpenter stepped onto the threshold, whom Els proudly introduced as the new alchemist. The bearded man, catching his breath, stared wide-eyed. Could this child really be taking on that same old, abandoned shop? Quickly recovering, he leaned his shoulder against the doorframe and prepared to take orders. Sarasa blushed brightly with excitement and blurted out a request to have a bed built as soon as possible. Any kind, as long as she didn't have to sleep on the floor. The cheerful woman slapped the blacksmith loudly and, without blinking, demanded a discount on the bed for her new alchemist, while Sarasa herself barely stood on her feet after that very greeting. Her back ached wildly, and nearby her worried friend rustled, reminding her of the empty wallet and the house where they hadn't even managed to get furniture yet. Forcing a smile, the girl assured that she would handle the payment herself. The bearded carpenter cried out in surprise, then crossed his arms and good-naturedly teased the awkward girl. But there still wasn't enough money for the blacksmith's work, so the new acquaintance decisively took them to the only tavern in the village for lunch, at her own expense. While the carpenter was hammering over the order, the talkative woman was already enthusiastically praising the local delicacies, and the embarrassed Sarasa did not dare to contradict her. Another heavy slap on the back almost bent Sarasa in half. The woman flatly refused to take money from the child, and the alchemist's gaze involuntarily caught on her figure. The auntie laughed heartily. "And she really is very round," flashed through the girl's mind. The woman was not offended at all, and proudly patted her sides, comparing herself to a sweet, plump mango. The volumes really left no doubt. As soon as they entered the noisy, crowded hall, Sarasa began to wave her hands in panic, and feverishly explained that she did not mean to imply excess weight at all. But no one was listening to her anymore. The aunt cheerfully switched to the tavern owner, handing out new friendly nudges amid loud laughter. Sarasa thoughtfully rubbed her chin, suspecting that hitting each other's backs was simply the local style of communication. She bowed politely and announced that she was opening an alchemy shop in the village. The cook was genuinely thrown off balance. Could such a child really be in charge of affairs? A lively conversation immediately started about how from now on, Sarasa would often come to the tavern for lunches. The woman decisively raised her thumb, as if to say, everything is settled. She introduced herself as Dalal, the owner of the local tavern, and warmly invited the girl to lunch since she still could not cook for herself. Sarasa blurted out. Dalal jumped up heartily and generously treated her with a signature dish in honor of the housewarming, then slapped Sarasa on the back, causing Sarasa to groan from back pain. Blushing, Sarasa awkwardly curled up under the loud pressure of the friendly hostess. The alchemist woman thanked tensely, feeling an unpleasant aftertaste from being simply used as a pretext. Both women suddenly turned to each other, again ready to clash with words. The tavern owner, meanwhile, frowned fiercely at the interlocutor nearby and growled that he was upsetting the girl. Pressing her lips, the older neighbor grumbled and resisted only for a moment. This time she agreed to pay for the girl herself. In a moment, both burst into uncontrollable laughter, instantly swallowing the recent quarrel. Someone's large hand gently patted the girl on the head. The women immediately hurried to apologize for their loud argument. Cook Dalal and her friend Els confessed with laughter that they had known each other since childhood, so their swearing was just a usual friendly pastime. In fact, they had been cooperating for a long time. The cook bought game from Els's husband and repaid her with hearty, free lunches. Returning to the counter, Dalal asked the guest about her food preferences, and she modestly replied that she did not need anything complicated. She was unpretentious. But in her mind, the girl was already tearing herself apart with panic. For her introverted nature, this noisy crowd and bustle were a pure tribe. She cautiously asked about local delicacies, but the cook just waved her hand, saying that only simple rural food was served here. Dalal briskly assured that there was no nastiness on the menu, and the girl finally felt the tension fall from her chest. Suddenly, Els remembered the peasants who simply adore that very pickled thing. The girl shuddered with disgust and instantly imagined a plate with crispy locusts or caterpillars. Turning pale, Sarasa cowered in fear, barely holding back the very feeling that immediately overwhelmed her. In fact, it was about old reserves for a bad harvest, the dish that locals hated to eat in its pure form due to its extremely specific taste. The guest asked resignedly what the delicacy was made of, and Dalal happily told about the pickles aged in a closed barrel for over a year. As soon as the guest managed to look around, the cook rushed to the kitchen for the signature dish, not allowing a single word to be inserted, leaving the girl trembling with pure horror. Usually, that sourness was washed with water for a long time before serving, but the local daredevils enjoyed eating it immediately, despising the pungent stench. Meanwhile, hot, fresh food was steaming appetizingly on the table, as if nothing had happened. The cheerful cook, Dalal, generously pushed plates toward the girl, then, smiling, added that she herself eats this every day. But as soon as the first spoon was dipped into the rich broth, the traveler was overwhelmed with pure delight. She even salivated from this taste. After a whole month of wandering on stale bread and salted dried meat, this dinner looked like a real feast. The only thing her slender body would gladly do without was the hostess's troublesome care. Dalal, overwhelmed with feelings, hit her hard on the back several times, saying to eat until full. After the empty bowls, the woman suddenly suggested going to visit the local mayor. The mountain settlement lived its quiet life. The girl was surprised by such simplicity, but Dalal laughed it off. This is not the capital with its unreachable king. She quickly dispelled the guest's anxiety, assuring that the village head definitely does not bite. Walking slowly along the path, the girl inquired about the mayor of Els and found out. He is an old but still quite lively grandfather with a cane. After the conversation, they had just reached his house. Els called the old man a ruin straight to his face, but he only laughed good-naturedly. The girl immediately introduced her companion, Sarasa, the new owner of the local shop. The man's bold jokes did not offend her in the slightest. Sarasa bowed deeply, a sign of respect. The old man even blushed from the honor of hosting the elite, but the girl, confused, awkwardly admitted that she was still a newcomer. He assured that the village would be glad for any help. Sarasa thanked with relief for the promise of support. For the locals, who cannot do without doctors, the alchemist is a real salvation. So at night, the girl firmly decided to keep a low profile, so as not to end up on the street on the very first day. It was time to clean. She snapped her fingers, and a magical stream of water gushed from the wooden basin with a roar. Washing with magic is much easier than it seems. A sharp step forward, and the windspell flew from her lips. The windows slammed wide open with a crash. Having spent all her strength, Sarasa cleaned the shop to flawless cleanliness, even shining. Sarasa sorted through old things and wondered whether it was worth putting them to use. Some were still perfectly suitable for wearing, but the rest had already come time to find a new application, especially since she had nothing to wipe the dust with at the moment. She pulled out a dress bought together with the shelter director before entering school. Back then, the girl had specially taken it to grow into. Sarasa pressed the fabric to herself and froze at the bitter truth. 5 years had passed, and the old clothes still fit her like ordinary pajamas. With hope, she felt her own breasts, looking for any changes. Remembering Lorea's figure, the girl sighed resignedly, but immediately drove away sad thoughts. She grabbed scissors and decisively cut the fabric. It was time to sew a blanket. Under the glow of the night moon, she approached the huge cauldron, ready to finish the work by resorting to alchemy. Sarasa froze before the shabby door, not believing that this day had finally come. Carefree birds chirped above the neglected little house. The girl leaned against the wall and barely restrained a nervous giggle, because in her thoughts she already held her own alchemical workshop. With one jerk, she flung the door wide open and triumphantly shouted into the darkness. Her eyes flashed, and the girl, almost in one breath, asked someone to pinch her. Everything around still seemed like a dream. A smile spread into joy, and then suddenly burst out into happy, almost uncontrollable laughter. She immediately rushed to the cauldron and sighed with relief. It was so huge that she herself could easily fit inside. Without this massive vessel, there could be no talk of any serious alchemy. Twisting a glass flask in her hands, Sarasa winked with satisfaction, fully understanding how difficult it would be to find a container of the right shape elsewhere. In the workshop, among other things, there was also a real glass furnace for making new potion bottles. Sarasa reached into her bag and pulled out a heavy alchemical encyclopedia. And as soon as she noticed some tools and ingredients left on the table by someone, she almost squealed with delight. Sarasa proudly puffed out her chest, convincing herself that she had every right to rejoice in her first real achievement. She clenched her fist decisively. It was time to brew the potion. She leaned back and beamed with excitement. Finally, she had a genuine alchemical laboratory at her disposal. At first, Sarasa poured ordinary water into the huge cauldron, as the recipe instructed. Happily checking the recipe, the girl immediately threw yesterday's cloth into the kettle. A dazzling flash. With a snap of her fingers, she kindled a magical fire under the cauldron. In a moment, additional ingredients from the flask flew into the water. The brew flared up brightly. The girl grabbed the stirrer and began vigorously stirring the boiling mixture. Half an hour passed. She exhaled heavily and wiped sweat from her forehead. Stirring such a volume was incredibly exhausting, even with her mana reserve. But the girl stubbornly stuck to the work, because she understood. Such a gigantic cauldron doesn't just lie around on the road. A sharp sweep, and she triumphantly pulled out a perfectly processed fabric from the water. Alchemy succeeded. A revolutionary material with climate control came out, the price of which is 6,000. Throwing the scroll on her back, she ran at full speed to dry it on the showcase, until the fabric began to lose its color. Sarasa proudly spread out the soft fabric, her first successful product in the new laboratory. Suddenly an excited exclamation sounded. This Geberk loudly praised the work of the young alchemist. The girl wiped the sweat from her forehead with relief, while the finished canvas caught the wind on the drying rack. Then she noticed her new bed in the master's cart. Sarasa blinked in confusion. The furniture looked like an ordinary pile of boards scattered messily. Geberk casually approached the cart, lifted the load, and took it on his shoulders, as if it was meant to be that way. He explained that it was much easier to bring inside this way, so he immediately pulled the parts upstairs, to the second floor. Not even a minute had passed, when the man was already proudly showing the fully assembled bed. And for complete reliability, he hammered it several more times with powerful blows of the hammer. The master inspected his work and asked, Contact me immediately if any problems arise. Sarasa carefully sat on the mattress. No creak, no extra sound. She settled more comfortably, allowing herself to enjoy perfect comfort. As soon as Sarasa felt such quality that should be guaranteed by the highest capital standards, stern Gayberk sincerely broke into a smile. The old master stunned Sarasa. He had just crafted chairs for her shop, because running a business without seats for customers is impossible. The man said goodbye kindly and left. The girl stared at the furniture in shock. They were given to her completely free of charge. Her eyes lit up. She recognized the handwriting of the legendary craftsman and vowed to master his skill. Her fingers enchantedly glided over the flawlessly smooth wood. It was already time to go to lunch, but the fabric was drying outside. She did not even blink while working. It was exactly noon. A doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Lorea was standing at the threshold, and Sarasa was just puzzling over how to leave the rare material worth over 6,000 unattended. Sarasa boasted about the successful dyeing of the fabric, and her friends sincerely appreciated the result. Lorea enthusiastically agreed that the dyed fabric turned out remarkably beautiful. Noticing that it was yesterday's precious material, Lorea volunteered to watch over it, and meanwhile go get lunch for two. Lorea suddenly asked anxiously if the girl had eaten at all today. The problem was solved instantly. Lorea ran out for lunch, and they spread a picnic mat right in the shop's yard. Near the huge branded sandwich of Saras, she awkwardly could only offer the guests a glass of plain water. Lorea gasped with delight. Lorea gently calmed her friend and assured her, "The local water itself is delicious, so a simple glass of it does not bother her at all." In front of them hung the luxurious snow-white fabric. In the sun, it sparkled like spring water, a real rarity for these lands. Lorea froze with excitement, not believing that her friend was capable of such work. She added that achieving such a shine with ordinary dyeing is also quite a skill. Now this beauty had to be stuffed with fluffy cotton, but in practice the task turned out to be challenging. Although in theory, the instructions for a perfect futon looked ridiculously simple. Sew a cover and tightly pack the filler into it. The blonde touched on the conversation about the shelter, where she shivered at night under a thin cover, due to the crazy price of cotton, and then Lorea, blushing, admitted, even her family cannot afford such luxury. She sighed and complained that cotton is so expensive that gathering enough for a whole blanket is almost impossible. This confession threw the blonde off her train of thought. She fell silent in surprise, not knowing what to say next. Putting aside sentiments, the girl frowned and scolded, saying that she is already an adult and works, so Lorea should apologize for again taking her for a peer. And at that moment, the blonde's gaze suddenly glazed over, as if something had sharply gone wrong. Wait a minute, what pocket money? A tense smile froze on her face. Only now did she finally realize how exactly she was perceived here. Lorea blinked in amazement, not understanding how her friend managed to buy such a huge pile of expensive cotton. She shared that she would soon be 14 and inquired about Sarasa's age. Casting a glance at her friend's modest figure, Lorea sighed with relief. It turned out she was not the only one lagging in development. Sarasa silently closed her eyes, accepting this bitter truth without any arguments. Then she burst out. That girl was a whole 2 years younger. Having composed herself a little, Sarasa dryly cut in that she was already 15. Lorea nodded happily, but the older friend immediately frowned, demanding an explanation for that evaluative look. Her face twisted in indignation. Lorea seemed to let it pass. She continued to smile happily. Eventually they got down to sewing, and the younger girl incessantly praised Sarasa's skill. One more stitch, and the luxurious, fluffy bedding was ready. Lorea ran headlong into Sarasa's arms, already anticipating an incredibly deep sleep. As promised, Sarasa proudly handed her friend the handmade bedding. She only playfully winked in response. After all, from the very beginning, she only wanted to please her friend. Lorea fearfully refused the expensive magical fabric, but Sarasa stubbornly handed her the package. The alchemist gently explained. She had already sewn everything she needed, so these leftovers were of no use to her. At such generosity, Lorea almost cried. She tightly pressed the bundle to her chest, joyfully promising to cherish this first symbol of their friendship. It got dark outside the window, so the girls finally gathered their thoughts and quickly made a plan for new cotton purchases. The conversation was completely exhausted. The end was inevitable. Sarasa proudly looked around the bedroom. The new bed from Master Heberk and the hand-sewn blankets looked simply flawless. The girls parted kindly at the shop's threshold, agreeing to meet again soon. Catching the pajamas on her shoulder, the alchemist loudly wished the world good night, and, without wasting a second, dived into bed at full speed. Sarasa blissfully curled up in the warm bed, wrapped in gentle coziness. She happily sank into the pillows, smiling as she recalled the successful alchemical practice and her first true friend. She absolutely needed to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow awaited her a big opening of her own business. The magical fabric softly warmed her in sleep, as if absorbing the room's magic, and gave absolute peace. The girl joyfully raised her fist. Time to make plans for the day and get to work. She glanced at the task board, stopped brewing the potion, and went outside. The fence crumbled with a crack right under her boot. Having checked everything against her notes, she finally chose the first target: repairs. Next to her own shop, she stopped and unhurriedly assessed the damage. Her face froze. She would have to build from scratch. She walked with small steps to the local store. Behind the counter, a familiar saleswoman immediately burst into panicked apologies over yesterday's expensive gift. The heroine gently reassured her. The girl's father had already generously repaid, bringing a month's supply of cotton. Hearing that she herself wanted to do repairs, the saleswoman surprisingly advised hiring the craftsman Heber. The girl ignored the advice and asked to buy a full set of tools. The dark-haired girl desperately waved her hands. A heavy chest appeared on the counter, a rare carpenter's set. Then the saleswoman produced an iron argument. Time wasted on boards would steal profits from alchemy, and the heroine gasped in amazement. Lorea noticed that the time spent on independent repairs could have been better invested by Sarasa in profitable alchemy. The alchemist proudly spread her cloak. Now she was a full-fledged master, although the orphan's habit of saving had not disappeared anywhere. Having taken the purchase, she looked at the holy fence and decided to hire the carpenter Heber. The girl asked the master to fix the facade and to close the yard with solid boards, awkwardly adding that she did not want to expose the laundry. She tried to justify her request, but Heber just burst out laughing. In their wilderness, there had never been any peepers. The carpenter continued to laugh heartily. Suddenly, he sharply grew serious. The man warned that signs and walls were not his specialty, so she would have to deal with that herself. She recognized with delight in him the creator of a luxurious bed, and Heber only sighed heavily, folded the drawings, and promised to start tomorrow. The girl smiled slyly. Curiosity was bursting, but work was waiting. Heber went away, and she froze in surprise, suspecting that the stern master had just blushed. The broad back of the carpenter slowly receded down the street. A crow sharply cawed over the yard, where the girl was already waiting. Nearby stood a full basket of picked plants. Realizing that tomorrow's repair would erase all the wild herbs near the fence, she feverishly picked the remnants and rushed into the house to brew the night potion. At night, Sarasa stubbornly grabbed the basket. The time to brew the potion had come. This was her last chance to gather all these healing herbs along the fence before the repair began. In the morning, she stretched sweetly, waking up to the chirping of birds in the open air. Sarasa blinked confusedly, still not understanding in the morning why she woke up under the open sky. Suddenly, she gasped. It just dawned on her what important day was set for today. She remembered the planned work and looked out the window in horror. A crowd had already gathered there. With a sharp jerk, she rushed outside. She was met by Master Heber, who immediately praised the cleared yard, while Sarasa puzzledly looked at the crowd of strangers behind his back. The man explained that for such a large project, he had called the neighboring boys for help. They greeted her cheerfully, and she finally introduced herself as the new owner of the local alchemy shop. Heber put down the toolbox and asked if there were any instructions before starting. Then he grimly swung a heavy hammer and promised to literally drive into the ground any one of the guys who dared to offend her. They swallowed nervously. The command to start was given, and the workers enthusiastically raised their hands. Sarasa only asked them to be careful in the backyard and not to accidentally trample her precious herbs. Heber smugly squinted and declared that before her was a true professional carpenter and a team of natural-born farmers. Then, Sarasa calmly got to work in her garden. She asked if the workers needed help, but the master waved it off. Without clear instructions, the girl could do whatever she wanted. While the men were sweating under the weight of the logs, Sarasa sat carefree nearby and hummed, looking at the young sprout. For now, the workers were vigorously hammering and dragging heavy logs, erecting a new fence. And the result of their labor was truly impressive. Instead of a fragile ruin, a sturdy wooden fence with new gates had grown. The abandoned yard quickly came to life and turned into a garden worthy of aristocrats. And the new sign, Sarasa's Alchemical Shop, turned out to be surprisingly charming. Sarasa was enchanted by the fresh sign, so welcoming and delicately pretty, a complete contrast to the previous rotten board. Sarasa confessed in shock that she had no idea Heberk was capable of such refined taste, to which he only grumbled, asking if she considered him a savage. The man confidently nailed the plaque by the entrance, reminding simply and firmly, the sign is the face of the establishment. The girl blossomed into a sincere smile and warmly thanked for all the support. The stern carpenter laughed good-naturedly and wished the girl luck on her long journey. The preparations were finally finished, and Sarasa proudly surveyed her shop. The time for her entrepreneurial debut had come. Fresh potions gleamed on the shelves, and among them, books arranged neatly and evenly. The room was flooded with warm sunlight, making every object seem more alive. The girl approached the door and decisively flipped the sign to open. Beaming with happiness behind the counter, she put up a sign about accepting orders and solemnly proclaimed the official opening of her alchemical atelier. As soon as Sarasa graduated from the academy, the teacher handed her her own shop. But instead of the dreamed-of place, she got an abandoned shack somewhere in a remote village. Thanks to the local master Heberk and the good-natured villagers, the ruins were washed, treated, and turned into a cozy place. Sarasa proudly stood behind the counter and with a radiant smile announced the opening. An hour passed, and she sat silently in the empty hall, sarcastically wondering, a huge crowd. Suddenly, a cheerful greeting sounded, and the doorbell jingled. Sarasa only sighed heavily over the mortar. No queues of buyers appeared. Lorea came to congratulate her friend on the opening, and Sarasa lit up because at least someone remembered her new shop. Lorea was shocked, staring at the price tag of 8,000, although Sarasa immediately assured her it was much cheaper than the capital's rates. The girl was touched by the sign on the counter. Customers were promised a discount for returning empty bottles. Lorea asked if it was possible to return someone else's containers, but the alchemist shook her head. Size standards vary among all masters. Sarasa clenched her fists in despair. Blowing ordinary glasses drained much more of her strength than brewing the potions themselves. That is why this promotion became a real salvation. Hunters get cheap elixirs, and she avoids the hellish work of the glassblower. Lorea quickly calculated and immediately understood everything. Her friend was buying back jars for almost half the price of the finished product. Sarasa nodded enthusiastically. The net profit from sales might decrease, but the saved time and effort would fully compensate for it. Without wasting a second, Sarasa began explaining to Lorea how her alchemical trade really worked. Lorea almost cried from jokes about wealth, while Sarasa was already mentally figuring out how to share the profit with the village so she wouldn't be expelled from monopoly. At that thought, a cold sweat ran down her temple. Sarasa instantly shook her friend back to reality. The slightest mistake in alchemy, and any product is devalued to zero, as if it never existed. For clarity, she pointed her finger at the expensive fabric. In this profession, without strict economy, you won't last long. Very quickly, you'll find yourself under a mountain of debts. Lorea screamed hysterically, imagining how incredibly rare ingredients were wasted, while Sarasa instead laughed cheerfully. In the evening of the first working day, the girl tallied the cash register. 17 sold potions brought 9,500 coins. And overall, during all the time, only a few groups of gatherers appeared at the shop's doorstep. A loud bang on the table interrupted the thoughts. Sarasa sharply remembered her duty to financially support the native orphanage. The numbers spoke for themselves. Even the cheapest ointment with a discount brought 200 coins of pure profit. Her face was hidden by a cunning glint of shadow. Only one sole jar completely covered the food expenses for the entire day. In 2 weeks, the earnings went up so steadily that Sarasa already recognized the local clients by face. Another 2 weeks passed since the store opened. Profits confidently grew, and Sarasa already effortlessly recognized the local gatherers. One of the satisfied clients, glowing with joy, promised to hunt twice as much prey. Discounts did their job. Rumors about the store spread throughout the town, and the assortment of goods rapidly increased thanks to the local hunters. And suddenly, right in front of the store, with a rumble, they threw down a huge bear of wrath. The hunters had hunted the giant just on the outskirts. The exhausted men were breathing heavily, but the offer greatly touched the girl. She quickly estimated the value of the organs and bones, so the gatherer gladly entrusted her with disassembling the beast so the carcass would not spoil. The gatherers exchanged surprised glances that the delicate girl herself took on skinning the giant, but they gladly supported the deal. Sarasa cunningly smiled goodbye and jokingly warned the man not to get drunk too early. She barely held the heavy bag of coins, paying the touched hunter for the generous prey. As soon as they got the money, the guys shouted and rushed headlong to the tavern. Left alone with the carcass, Sarasa activated her superpower and firmly grabbed the giant. She pulled it aside and instantly cooled the body with magic. The giant beast was laid on its back. Nearby, prepared knives and a hammer were already waiting. There were no mistakes. With one skillful movement of the blade, she made a long cut from the neck to the belly, carefully removing the skin. Sarasa joyfully raised the knife, preparing to cut out the liver and eyes, too valuable loot to leave in the forest. She squeezed the bloody heart in her hands with adoration. There was no time for a full disassembly of the entire bear carcass, so the girl took only the rarest trophies and decided to simply trade the rest. A victorious shout rang out, and she suddenly jumped out right in front of her acquaintance. The girl stubbornly dragged the giant monster across the ground, not retreating a single step. The acquaintance froze in surprise, seeing how Sarasa was dragging a whole forest monster behind her. Els almost fainted at the scale of the carcass, while Sarasa casually estimated the terms of the deal. The trade was successful. Sarasa cheerfully added that smoked bear meat is a real delicacy, and perhaps the best product among gatherers. Soon the alchemist returned to her cozy shop. She carefully poured the obtained heart with a solution and hid it in a large glass jar. The wooden sign on the door clicked. The shop is open. Looking at the preserved organs, Sarasa remembered how she once hated preparation, and now truly feared that this gruesome display would scare away all the buyers. Placing the jars on the shelf, she nervously blinked. Probably too many ingredients already. Weighing her meager finances and a pile of unsold goods, she smiled contentedly. A solution was found. There was no more time to wait for customers in the empty shop. Throwing a heavy backpack over her shoulder, the girl decisively flung open the door and set off to trade in the nearest town. Hopping on the go, she briskly sped down the road. The carriage dropped her off in southern Strauss, a small, cozy town. The purpose of the visit was simple: to sell the collected materials. The only trouble: no one here had ever heard of her native village, Yoke. The girl gladly dispelled the surprise. The village is officially called Yoke, but almost no one uses this name. She only had to find the alchemy shop for future wholesale purchases, and she still needed to arrange with Laurie's father about the supply of goods. Her stomach suddenly growled, so she dared to step over the threshold of an expensive restaurant, which had so far frightened her with its appearance. Inside, life was bustling, and a smiling maid was already hurrying towards her. The smiling maid led her to a free table and offered to make herself comfortable. The numbers on the menu made the girl break out in a cold sweat, and out of fear she also ordered a fruit cake. Her gaze slid between the desserts, but she had to grit her teeth and choose the cheapest cheese bun for lunch. She looked away, awkwardly catching his gaze. She spent a whole 2,000 coins on this snack, and now she would be choking on stale bread for the next 2 weeks. The girl smiled broadly. It was so cozy here that she instantly felt at home. A calm atmosphere of a luxurious cafe prevailed around, where maids were leisurely serving tea. She remembered her tiny table and began thinking about how to decorate it with a simple bouquet. While the smiling maid finally brought her order, the girl just waited intently. While the maid was smilingly arranging the dishes on the table, she was already dreaming of her own tea time with Lorea. On the plate steamed a thin bun with vegetables and cheese sauce. In real life, it looked 10 times more appetizing. From the very first bite, her cheeks involuntarily puffed up with satisfaction. She got the idea to make it herself, but reality hit her in the head. There wasn't even a stove at home. Another big piece quickly disappeared into her mouth. The girl squinted, trying to guess the ingredients of the tomato sauce and recognize the hidden spices. The taste simply exploded. Rich cheese, a slight tang, juicy meat with vegetables, and the dough literally melted on the tongue. Next came a generous piece of fruit cake. The dishes clinked, As soon as the main course was finished, she firmly decided to buy a set of spices for home, if she could sell her goods profitably. The sweet dessert awakened warm memories of Maria and the teacher's shop, where exactly the same cakes were served for lunch. The girl decided to prolong the pleasure of the dessert, to regret the emptied wallet a little less. She stuffed her cheeks, delighted that the flavor stretched out to 2 full meals at once. The elegant tea time was interrupted and came to an end. Leaving the restaurant, she exhaled loudly and with relief. Her stomach was already full, but there was no trace left of money. Now, to business. 2 alchemical shops were marked on the city map, and, according to rumors, they were no different. She thoughtfully raised her gaze. Deciding to head to the nearest one, the girl confidently walked along the bright cobblestone street. But already on approach, she smiled nervously. Could it be that the owners are stingy even with a cleaner? A cautious hand touched the worn door handle. A prolonged creak sounded, as if the door did not want to open. From the eerie entrance covered with cobwebs, there was a sense of emptiness and gloom. Inside, amidst complete disorder, she was met by the cunning gaze of a scruffy, bearded alchemist. She quickly glanced at the display case. The potions exhibited were almost indistinguishable from her own. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. There was not a single complex elixir on the shelves, so it remained only to guess whether this master worked exclusively on order or simply was not very skilled. The girl nervously tightened the straps of her bag, feeling a sticky, appraising gaze upon her. The bearded shopkeeper in glasses tore himself away from a jar with a bizarre organ and dryly asked what she needed. She confidently laid out her goods on the table. With a proud smile, the girl declared that this was a flawlessly extracted heart of the Bear of Wrath, and it cost at least 100,000. Her face darkened. She mentally processed the brazen accusations about old goods and clumsy hands. The shopkeeper shamelessly grimaced and threw out a pitiful offer. 12,000. "What did you just blurt out, scoundrel?" she exploded, clenching her fist to the crunch. And in a moment, she sharply headed for the door, coldly saying goodbye to the panicking swindler. In a hurry, he jabbed his finger into the liver, raising the bet to 20,000 for everything. In her memory, the vile laughter of the resellers surfaced again, and the girl, holding her breath anxiously, hoped that the other store would at least not be such a hole. Sighing deeply through the wasted time, she firmly decided to warn her village about this place. The street led her to a new shop. At first glance, it looked like a real salvation. Inside, she was warmly greeted by a woman with a pleasant smile. The girl politely bowed and asked to see the goods. Instead, she received a gentle invitation to come closer. Sarasa carefully scanned the shelves and froze for a moment. There was truly a large selection of weight loss and sun protection products here. She clenched her fist and gathered herself, preparing for action. Looking at the elegant hats, the girl suddenly thought that she could sell something similar in her own shop. She went to the counter and confidently handed the owner a jar with the fresh heart of the furious bear. The woman's eyes lit up, and without hesitation, she named the price. 120,000. Sarasa froze at such an amount, and the owner explained, due to the crazy shortage, the price of this product had soared to the skies, and asked if the girl happened to be an alchemist. Feeling that Sarasa had set up her business near the forest, the woman joyfully clapped her hands. Obtaining forest ingredients had become too difficult lately. She sincerely praised the young guest's skill and asked who had taught her so well. The owner's gaze again became enchanted and fixed on the perfectly preserved trophy. Sarasa, somewhat embarrassedly, admitted that her mentor was none other than Ophelia Millis. The owner said that learning from such a person was probably incredibly difficult, and the girl replied, she just wanted to be worthy of her gift. The news that before her stood a full-fledged apprentice of the legendary master literally left the woman speechless. Sarasa warmly introduced herself and expressed hope for a profitable partnership. Moved by the girl's unprecedented ambition, the interlocutor smiled warmly and finally introduced herself as Leonora. Leonora smiled warmly. The young guest reminded her of her own first days in the shop, when money melted before her eyes. The girl snapped out of it and with a bang placed jars with terrifying ingredients on the table. Leonora warmly offered to be addressed in writing whenever advice was needed, and the girl gratefully promised to remember this. At the crazy sum, 380,000. Her jaw simply dropped. She showered thanks, but Leonora just waved it off, This rare merchandise saved her herself. Stacks of fresh coins shone heavily on the table. A mention of the scoundrel who dared to take out the monster's heart for a mere 12,000 instantly angered the girl. She sighed in disappointment and replayed that visit to the shop in her mind again. The girl recounted the whole story about the slick shopkeeper in detail, and Leonora listened cheerfully and was just as sincerely outraged with her. Leonora warmly supported her and promised to always help. Alchemists must stick together. Unable to hold back laughter, they sincerely mocked the greedy profiteer who recklessly decided that a child could be an easy target. Done with the jokes, the girl cautiously asked if next time she could send someone else instead of herself for the exchange. Leonora was surprised. Carriages do not go to that village, so the messenger will definitely need his own horse. And the girl only breathed a sigh of relief, imagining strong Darnu. He was perfect for such journeys. As soon as she heard about half a day on foot, Leonora almost spat out her drink. She slammed the table with a bang. That's over 10 miles. But the girl casually admitted that she had been enhancing her body with body-strengthening magic the whole way. The alchemist wearily rubbed her forehead. Of course, such spells last only a few minutes. Otherwise, you could burn your brain from the sheer strain. The apprentice blinked innocently, as if it were the most natural talent in the world. Simply an innate gift. She remembered her teacher, who never turns off the enhancement for a moment. So Leonora was completely stunned by such news. In the evening, the girl went outside in a borrowed nightgown, and her embarrassed appearance almost made the hostess squeal with emotion. The alchemist vividly imagined how the child would sleep sweetly in her home, and was already mentally choosing a new bed for her. Extending a cup of tea, Leonora with a sly smile hinted at a response, as if she might visit her village sometime. Wrapped up in a blanket up to her ears, the girl fell asleep, thinking how incredibly lucky she was to meet such a kind person. And in a completely different place, someone's hand decisively slammed on the table. If they set off right now, the journey would take exactly 3 days. The woman by the night window put aside the papers. All calculations and matters were finally settled. The famous teacher threw a cloak over her shoulder, and with her cunning smile, set off. It was time to personally check the progress of her dear student. Sarasa decisively drew the sword. Returning from the city, she noisily opened the window and joyfully announced the opening of her shop. Hunter Andre met her with great gratitude. The ransomed bear and his team was already swimming in money. The bell rang cheerfully, and the boy, as always, stepped over the threshold. The hostess placed the ordered potions on the counter, simultaneously telling how a fresh monster carcass helped her earn a good amount. Next to it on the wall hung a hand-drawn poster, a warning about scammers who were undercutting prices by 10 times. Andre sincerely praised her cheap elixirs, saying they instantly got hunters back on their feet after minor forest skirmishes. But suddenly his gaze caught on a new announcement. Sarasa indignantly snatched the confession. She hung this text today because she herself had almost become a victim of scammers. Andre was choking with laughter. Supposedly, some fool didn't even realize that he was trying to fool an experienced alchemist. He openly rejoiced. As soon as this shop appeared in the village, their own wealth soared to the skies. But the girl could not calm down. The brazen lies of the buyers about fictitious damages to perfect goods would not let her settle. Imagining the confident face of the swindler, the boy burst out laughing again. However, the smile instantly faded. Andre was truly worried about the young green novices who, without preparation, rushed into the forest like wild wolves. The girl-gatherer hurried to complain to Sarasa about the influx of novices and the crazy competition that surrounded them from all sides. Her partner nodded sympathetically. Their work was not easy. Treating the wounded was another duty of the local alchemist. The guests warned that they might come someday to heal the wounds, and the girl nervously swallowed. Her rehearsed greeting broke off halfway through the word. She was just begging the heavens never to encounter strangers' injuries when the doorbell rang again. Suddenly, her mentor Ophelia appeared in front of the counter. The teacher was beaming, and Sarasa stood with her mouth open. 3 days? The stunned student exclaimed. The journey from the capital to this village usually took a whole month by carriage. The mentor waved it off carelessly. She said she simply ran the entire distance. Sarasa tried to joke off, saying she was not yet such a monster in physical training, but cold sweat immediately gave her away completely. Ophelia instantly realized that she had skipped training. Excuses about the academy did not work. The teacher gladly promised to personally teach her real combat. The teacher forcibly pulled the frightened student out of the shop, ignoring all pleas to let her go. In a moment, they were already standing in a forest clearing. The girl was gasping for air weakly. The mentor asked about her favorite weapon, and as soon as she heard about the sword, she feigned a shrug. The student immediately seized this opportunity to escape from the fight, but suddenly a luxurious blade flashed before her eyes. The girl was still babbling about postponing the lesson, while the teacher lamented that the best student still had no weapon. The command, "Hands forward," and the mentor simply threw her a heavy blade. The girl was confused by the cost of such a weapon, but for the woman it was just an ordinary piece of metal from the closet. She herself took a wooden sword, stretched a fierce smile, and took a fighting stance. The girl drew the blade. The teacher openly mocked her, saying she was not capable of drawing even a drop of her blood. To remove all inhibitions, she took out a healing elixir, ordered to strike with full force, because she could survive even on the brink of death. With a desperate scream, the girl rushed into the attack, but her true steel was easily stopped by the teacher's ordinary wooden weapon. The girl gritted her teeth and cursed in despair. The teacher only smiled eerily. A lightning-fast series of attacks yielded no result. The teacher parried the blows playfully, and despite everything, managed to praise the opponent's technique with interest. "I was the best swordswoman in the course," the girl sobbed, just realizing that for the teacher, this fight looked like child's play. While the exhausted student gasped for air, the teacher, not sweating a drop, declared that she could still become a good warrior. The blade thudded dully into the ground. Hearing that the training was not over yet, the girl recoiled in panic, but the teacher mercilessly dragged her across the grass, forcing her to continue until nightfall, while their acquaintance awkwardly watched from the side. Finally, evening came, and the moon slowly rose above the house. At the generously set table, the student felt that the real purpose of the visit was not only to test skills. Rooted in the warmth of home, she quietly asked about the main reason. Munching the spicy dish heartily, the girl suddenly heard that the teacher had come to take her back to the capital, admitting that she had simply left her in the wilderness unprepared. And then, all too mundanely, she added sarcastically that with diligent training, the trip there and back would take only a few hours. The girl could only shed a tear. The nearest town was many miles away, so for the sake of the journey, she would have to close the shop for several days. Ophelia praised her potion for muscle growth. No side effects, and wealthy clients simply snap it up, despite the sky-high price. The recipe turned out to be in the 6th volume of the Encyclopedia, which Sarasa had not yet reached, hopelessly stuck on the 3rd. At dinner, the teacher promised her a ready elixir to increase physical strength and endurance. Sarasa greedily swallowed her food and almost cried, grumbling about her bitter fate. No money, no time for proper study. Then Ophelia advised hiring a permanent assistant, citing her own faithful partner Maria as an example. The idea of shifting the daily routine onto someone else's shoulders stubbornly stuck in her mind. Sarasa suddenly froze. If Maria had been working with her since the very beginning of her career, then how many years old was that woman who never seemed to age? Ophelia suspected nothing, and immediately voiced the second purpose of her visit, to install a magical teleport in the shop. The teacher carefully covered the sleeping girl with a blanket, and finally advised, once again, to find a reliable person nearby. This teleport turned out to be an artifact of the highest complexity. Its price reached a staggering 32 million. Due to strict restrictions and the prohibition of transporting living beings, it was mostly used only for mail. Ophelia promised to buy all collected materials at high capital prices. From this, Sarasa almost cried with happiness, barely touching the floor, and the complex magical circle instantly flared up, activating without any delay. Having finished her work, the teacher smiled and prepared to listen to stories about the independent life of her young student. Moved to tears, Sarasa gratefully clasped her hands and secretly rejoiced. The mentor would hardly charge her for installing such an expensive teleport. At night, Sarasa stood in front of her new shop and smiled, pondering where to start. But already in the morning, the teacher stunned her. She dumped a whole pile of bags with coins on the table, buying all the stock and making a generous prepayment. The edge of the cloak flashed over the table with flasks. The woman, with a sly smile, turned around. She almost forgot something important. The mentor walked away, waving cheerfully goodbye, and the girl only watched her with regret that she was never allowed to handle the business herself. The teacher's order still echoed in her ears, to train thoroughly and improve skills before her next visit. With a skeptical expression, Sarasa thought that a showy sword swing hardly defines a true alchemist, but she resigned herself and went to hone her strikes. The leaves rustled quietly, as if emphasizing this pause before training. Suddenly, a conversation from a week ago surfaced when Sarasa complained. Because of the shop, she completely lacks time for training. Then Lorea enthusiastically exclaimed that she was ready to substitute for her. She assured, her parents can easily manage their business without her involvement. And today, the girl's father, Darna, personally visited Sarasa to thank her for employing his daughter. The man smiled warmly. Sarasa admitted, she is scared to pay Darna more than the adult villagers, even though Darna cited the high capital incomes as an example. But as soon as she mentioned the generous literacy rate for Lorea, he almost turned gray with fright and began feverishly waving his hands. Sarasa immediately realized such money would make the child a target for the envious. Her imagination immediately pictured a crying Lorea. She is panic-stricken, calling for help. In the darkness, the eyes of the greedy crowd gleamed predatory. Shaking off these fears, Sarasa happily squeezed her friend's hands. Lorea was officially accepted into the alchemical shop. She proudly decided she would pay the assistant a little more than her peers, because her abilities are definitely worth every coin. During the meal, Sarasa sincerely sealed the agreement, and finally included Lorea in the alchemical shop. The alchemist calmly stirred the potion in the cauldron, and relief was felt in her mood. The assistant took over all the routine with the ingredients. It was then that Lorea confessed she is afraid of robbers because of the large sums lying in the cash register. In her free time, she eagerly finished reading the already 4th volume, thanks to the books from the teacher. The owner only gave a predatory smile. The shop had such powerful magical protection that it would not kill a thief, but it would make him beg for death. While the girl innocently squinted, a random customer behind her almost turned gray from horror. The woman's face twisted with panic, and then the doors burst open with a crash. A cry for help thundered, and the frightened visitor immediately fled deep into the hall. A bloodied group burst into the shop. A man barely stood on his feet under the weight of an unconscious girl, leaving red puddles on the floor. The alchemist immediately threw jokes aside, ordered Lori to escort all unnecessary people out, and commanded to urgently lay the wounded on the floor. Quickly glancing over the body, she swallowed tensely. The victim was not only mutilated, but also poisoned. For a moment, fear flashed across her face. The wounded girl's condition was much worse than it seemed. The tearful companion handed her a bundle and desperately began to beg to save Iris. She trembled, choking on hysterical tears. In the bundle lay a left hand torn out with flesh and bone, but the alchemist coldly refused. The girl's healing was possible, if they were ready to pay an excessively high price. The severed hand hung eerily on the ground, roughly torn out along with the bone, and the blood still groaned in the light. The blonde froze in horror, not averting her gaze from the bloodied friend. The healer in the beret calmly examined the wounds and coldly announced the treatment would be extraordinarily expensive. The guy in the bandana burst out with swearing because of such greed, but the blonde sharply ordered him to shut up. She froze in surprise. Tears glistened in her eyes, and she burst out crying. It was precisely because of their amateurish self-activity that Iris had to put herself in harm's way and tear her own body apart. The healer calmly presented the choice, saving a life or complete healing, and the blonde, choking with despair, exclaimed that she would give any money just to be healed immediately. As soon as she got the consent, the doctor immediately got to work and sent the girls to the backyard for fresh water. She opened the cabinet with the medicines. Ordinary ointments would not have worked here, so elixirs for flesh regeneration, antiseptics, and a powerful antidote were used. The work boiled. While the assistant washed the blood from the severed limb, the healer generously poured magical solution on the torn shoulder. She leaned over the unconscious Iris and injected the medicine directly into her mouth, closing mouth to mouth to start regeneration. Without stopping for a moment, Sarasa poured one potion after another, and the stunned companions did not take their eyes off her. As soon as this happened, the healer opened the next bottle, preparing to administer the antidote and the restorative agent. Another portion of the potion hissed as it entered the mangled flesh, and the body began to recover again. The gatherers were furious and cursed the alchemists for demanding payment, even when someone's life was at stake. The alchemist girl, without any haste, put forward her own terms. They will go into the forest and repay the debt with rare ingredients. One of the mercenaries rushed into the attack, cursing everything, but he was immediately sharply stopped. The girl did not even blink. With an icy tone, she cut off so that they would not dare to count on a handout. She harshly explained that the mercenaries go into the thickets only for money, and rumors about free treatment would only drive crowds to her door. Remembering the price she paid for the rare medicine, she ordered the men to get out. Otherwise, she would call security. The ruffians froze in fear. The fabric split with a crack under her fingers. The scissors quickly cut through the blood-soaked clothes. Sarasa called to Lori, "Lock the front door and draw all the curtains," and she immediately rushed to comply. On the unconscious girl's stomach, terrifying torn wounds from claws were blackening. The alchemist carefully pressed the wound, and the injured girl groaned dully, shuddering from unbearable pain. Poison, burns, and traces of 4 paws immediately formed a clear, unmistakable picture. At that moment, the hell grizzly attacked them, a giant, fiery, mutant bear that no one expected in these parts. The healer poured the remaining potion directly into the torn sternum, praying that the body would withstand such a horse dose of magic. Empty vials rolled across the floor. She knew well that pouring so many different elixirs was extremely risky, so she silently prayed that the body would endure one more dose. She froze over the motionless body. The torn flesh healed right before their eyes, and the healer finally exhaled with relief. With a warm smile, she advised not to pay attention to the words of those fools who abandoned them in trouble. Having recovered a little, Kate began to explain how their squad got into this mess in the first place. The tearful companion of the survivor confessed that they had joined forces with these guides only today, due to unfamiliarity with the area. Fingers touched the magic circle above the patient's chest, and the pulse and breathing completely stabilized. Exhausted, Sarasa reassured Kate that the efforts were not in vain. Iris just needed time to regain consciousness. The girl angrily scolded herself for trusting the wrong path, although she was tried to be held back by words that the mercenaries, at least, did not immediately flee from the grizzly. Realizing that her friend would survive, she could not hold back and burst into bitter tears. Her fingers clung tightly to the rescuer's palm. The healer smiled gently in response. It was the first time she had pulled someone from the other world, but she strictly followed the mentor's rule, never to show the patient her own horror. The alchemist allowed the guests to stay in the shop until the wounded Iris recovered. Lorea readily picked up the wooden water tub. Kate sharply turned around and rushed to their things. The guests were settled in the room upstairs. Their belongings were already brought in, and the unconscious Iris was carefully laid in bed. In the thick steam, the alchemist gently wiped the hot skin of the unconscious Iris. Then the girls, lifting her heavy, limp body, slowly climbed the stairs. Late in the evening, sitting over a cup of tea, they finally exhaled after the ordeal. To praise her steel endurance during the rescue, the alchemist only grimly averted her gaze. In the silence, Lorea dared to ask an uncomfortable question. Would she have treated Iris if Kate hadn't paid? The answer sounded harsh. Free work would have been a sentence both for all alchemists and for the gatherers. This was supposed to provoke a total devaluation of their work, and ultimately kill the craft itself. Sarasa gently apologized for such a harsh lesson that tore Lorea from childhood illusions. Suppressing her emotions, the alchemist asked to accept this truth right now, so as not to live in illusions in the future. Lorea froze in confusion, not taking her eyes off her. The blonde wavered and lowered her gaze, consumed by a bitter thought. By saving only one person today, she condemns dozens of others to helplessness. Her dark-haired partner, meanwhile, barely restrained herself from pulling hair out of panic, calculating again and again what all this would result in losses. To give away so many expensive potions on a mere promise, it seemed to her pure madness. Over a cup of tea, the girls agreed on one thing. If those 2 fools had come for medicine, they would have been immediately shown the door. Her gaze slid over the pharmacy shelves, anticipating the worst financial scenario. But the blonde suddenly pressed her palm to her chest and admitted that she had intuitively trusted Kate. The girl just closed her eyes and smiled warmly. She decided simply, if she was still deceived, it would be the price for her own naivety. So far, in that quiet room, the rescued stranger slowly opened her eyes. Iris respectfully bowed her head to the hostess, thanking her for saving her life. Just yesterday, she lay torn in a pool of blood. No one expected her to recover so quickly. But the strong body of the fighter took over, And already the next day, the girl opened her eyes. Over a cup of tea, Iris tried to pay the bill herself, but the manager waved it off with a smile. She would cover all expenses for Kate. The friends immediately got into a funny quarrel, arguing over the recent encounter with the bear. A loud slap of a palm on the table sharply cut off their childish noise. But Kate stubbornly did not back down. She had asked for treatment, so she should bear this financial burden. The hostess advised them to clear the debt together, saying the amount turned out simply unmanageable. She slyly squinted and unambiguously pointed at Kate. Since she ordered the medicine, the bill was on her. Realizing the true scale of the debt, the blonde turned pale and began apologizing confusedly. An awkward silence hung, broken by a nervous laugh. Iris enthusiastically waved her hand. Just yesterday her limb was completely severed, and today it already worked like new. The manager forced a smile and admitted that she had poured her last reserves of elixirs into her, strictly ordering not to take such risks again. Eventually she softened a bit and canceled the fee for her work. She only left the friends to cover the cost of the potions themselves. Pale, Kate nervously swallowed, and gathering her courage, finally dared to ask about the final amount for the treatment. Sarasa casually announced the astronomical 20 million. At such figures, the girls instantly froze, because an ordinary farmer wouldn't earn that even in a century. The alchemist nodded contentedly, while the frightened debtors trembled and swore to work, until their hands fell off. Already at the table, Iris quietly and submissively accepted the price. After all, they had sewn on a severed limb and literally pulled her back from the other world. Sarasa gently placed her hand on her shoulder and confessed. She herself did not believe in success, but had to take the risk. Iris tenderly covered her palm with her own, sincerely thanking her for the rescue. Sarasa beamed, admiring this moment and enjoying the warm atmosphere of true friendship. But suddenly, Lorea sharply leaned forward. The friends involuntarily flinched from the surprise. She inquired whether it was possible to regrow the hands completely, without any remnants of the limb itself, and the manager calmly nodded. Iris froze, with her hand near her face, and anxiety grew. She was pondering what such a generous offer would lead to. Sarasa's face suddenly became predatory. She slyly squinted and hinted at endless repayment, throwing the team into panic again. Her sinister laughter finally crushed the girls. The prospect of eternal free slavery became frighteningly real. Iris, drenched in cold sweat, cautiously raised her hand, begging to slow down and agree on a payment schedule. Sarasa immediately changed her tone and playfully winked at Lori. As her best employee, she was guaranteed full insurance in case of any injuries. At the table, the girl in the beret asked the rescued ones to tell what they were capable of. The black-haired woman immediately froze in confusion, began to apologize, but the hostess smiled and advised her to just relax. The guest swallowed hard and obediently agreed to all the conditions, burning with shame for her miserable state. But as soon as this happened, her stomach loudly growled throughout the room, and her face instantly flushed with a deep blush from embarrassment. The hostess kindly ordered to prepare dinner, promising that they would not put the food on their tab. Both girls waved their hands in panic, refusing such luxury in unison. Then, the girl in the beret unequivocally sent them to the bathroom. Her gaze became piercing, like a blade. The black-haired woman almost cried, deciding that she smelled worse than a pig in the mud. The hostess calmly remarked that yesterday's towel drying in bed was hard to call proper washing. She categorically stated that she would not tolerate dirt in her house, cutting off all paths to retreat. The light-haired woman innocently admitted that she had undressed them completely to wash the clothes, and the black-haired woman strained and squeezed out, "Then who dried her?" Suddenly a memory surfaced. Sarasa herself was drying the helpless Iris right in bed. Realizing that it was the hostess herself who did it, she howled from unbearable shame. Iris and her blonde companion finally caught their breath in a warm bath with foam. Stress retreated reluctantly. Iris almost cried, while the cheerful Sarasa drove them to wash until they shone. Later, they gathered around the round table, and Sarasa suggested discussing the encountered monster in detail. While the dried meat was before them, a quiet agreement sounded. Iris raised her hands and showed the size of the monster. She described a four-armed bear, the one that towered over her by at least 2 heads. Everything flashed before her eyes like a spark. The fire-breathing monster proved invulnerable to the blade, and its stone claws instantly knocked the sword from Iris's hands. The blonde shuddered and added that they ran without stopping and reached the village in just 20 minutes. Sarasa focused and raised a finger, dissecting and analyzing that poison and flame. The girls huddled together, asking in horror if their settlement was safe now. The conclusion sounded like a verdict. All clues led to the infernal grizzly. Iris slammed the table in outrage upon hearing from Sarasa that for a true beast, he was no longer so dangerous. Only now did the blonde realize the terrible truth. In this world, beasts were not ordinary predators, but unstoppable killing machines. Yet even Sarasa could not understand why this monster from the depths of the forest came out to the people. And from this, anxiety bit deepest into the heart. The huge infernal grizzly came too close to the village, forcing the girls to hide in the bushes. Sarasa tensed, realizing only those who enter the forest themselves are now at risk. Lorea hopefully asked the governor for help, but Sarasa doubted that he truly cared. After all, the authorities will not spend resources to save adventurers who voluntarily put themselves in danger. A cruel ruler is indifferent to the cries of people, while a good one destroys the threat before it even appears. Lorea instinctively covered her mouth in horror. Barely hearing the not very encouraging assessment of the local ruler, Sarasa immediately became eager to inquire about him in more detail. The mention that the first victim of the beast could be the familiar hunter Jasper threw Lorea off track. Sarasa rubbed her chin and stretched a cunning smile. Her friend trembled with panic, carrying anxiety for every villager in her thoughts, as if for a relative. Suddenly, Sarasa, as if joking, suggested to the girls to take a walk in the forest, and this sentence instantly threw them into absolute stupor. In a moment, the space was torn apart by a huge, hellish grizzly, unleashing fury with a roar. While the monster was getting angry, the young alchemist with a joyful smile suggested to her friends to hunt it, and again shocked them with the same surprise. The black-haired girl worried about how exactly they would dare to kill the beast, but the alchemist carelessly waved it off. One bear is not a problem. Kate blinked in confusion, unable to gather her thoughts and believed that the alchemist would really try to take down a grizzly with her bare hands. She was already allowed calculating deadly strikes, pondering where to hit to extract the most valuable materials from the carcass. The friends stared at her in admiration. The black-haired girl was finally convinced. The rumors about the insane strength of alchemists were not someone's invention, but pure truth. She decisively slammed her palm on the table and immediately agreed to go together to help drag the trophy. The alchemist cast such a look at the blonde that it became clear. This conversation was unavoidable. She nervously swallowed her saliva. The alchemist gently reminded Iris about her recent wounds, but the black-haired girl interrupted, saying that the carcass could be dragged even without full recovery. The alchemist panicked inwardly. She had hoped that her friend would convince Iris to stay, not the other way around. Iris cheerfully jumped up and reported that she was joining the hunt too, which shocked both girls. Iris passionately declared that no bear would stop her, while the other girls watched her determination in embarrassment. Suddenly, Kate suggested canceling the trip and staying home. Iris twitched sharply. Moment by moment, she was crushed by the thought that she might become a burden. Sarasa mercilessly finished her off with words. In such a state, on a mission, she would only cause problems. While Sarasa pondered all this, she honestly admitted to herself, for transporting the bear, extra hands would definitely be needed. Iris begged for a compromise with tears, but instead received a harsh refusal. The wounded were ordered to lie down, so as not to accidentally drag others into trouble. Iris nearly lost her soul while being forced to go to sleep. But Sarasa guessed. Behind this stubbornness was a deep personal motive. At night, the shop fell silent, and Sarasa gladly began preparations. She briskly ordered the patient to fall asleep and regain strength. The burly tracker stood before the squad for the first time, and against his mighty stature, tiny Sarasa seemed almost a child. Morning came, and the hunting squad set off into the forest. Sarasa, Kate, Iris, and the hired tracker Jasper. Jasper immediately warned he would not fight monsters. This suited Sarasa just fine. She only needed his sense of smell for prey. Sarasa sharply pulled on her combat gloves. If hell broke loose, she would take down the beast herself, and the rest would flee immediately. Already in the forest, Iris sat down in the grass and bitterly cried, still tormenting herself with thoughts of her own helplessness. Suddenly she froze in place, Behind her, Sarasa appeared holding some kind of gift for her. The hunter ordered the girls to run as soon as they smelled something burning, but Sarasa just smiled carefree, while Iris burned with her own worthlessness in the background. Iris desperately argued that she could carry more than one glass, but Sarasa assured her. Alchemy had already lightened her back. Instead, she handed the girl a small jar, saying, "Let her keep it at hand and not get in the way during the fight." Inside was an insect repellent, the very remedy that suddenly became a bestseller in her shop. For Iris, this request became a lifeline. She almost cried with happiness, feeling truly needed. The girl proudly puffed out her chest and laughed, promising to keep the treasure safe. And then Sarasa asked Kate to show the way. The boots quietly rustled along the forest path. After half an hour, making their way through the thickets, they came across the first traces. The hunter stopped abruptly and waved forward, indicating where to look. The ground was generously soaked with blood. Kate recognized with horror the place where the beast had attacked them. Looking out from behind a tree, the man estimated the monster's size and asked fearfully if Sarasa really intended to fight it. Seeing huge claw marks on the grass, he nervously swallowed. Cold sweat broke out on him. While the companions panicked, Sarasa thoughtfully put a finger to her lips. Killing the monster was not the problem. The question was how to do it cleanly. Iris, with tears of happiness, clung to her sword and whispered that she could not live without her precious. Then suddenly she shuddered. A stranger's voice from the side calmly confirmed that the blade was indeed valuable. Turning around, Iris saw the manager with a sly smile, as if she already knew everything. With the sound of a blow in her head, her own invention about the accidentally lost weapon surfaced. Drenched in cold sweat, she tried to justify herself, but the boss already recalled. On the day of their acquaintance, Iris came to the shop empty-handed. The blonde just playfully waved it off, while the frightened Iris desperately swore that she got the job not through trickery. In response, there was no anger, rather joyful words. The repentant swordswoman dropped to her knees and begged for forgiveness, under the reproachful glances of the companions. The manager warmly hugged her, and the touched Iris burst into tears throughout the forest. After long stalking and tears, the mustached mercenary grimly stated, "Bears never abandon their prey." He recalled the terrifying rumors about the Hellfire Grizzlies. They pursued people all the way to their homes if they took their food. While the group was making their way through the forest, Iris was still quietly sobbing in the boss's embrace. The mercenary sharply pointed at a giant paw print. The predator chased the girl right up to this place. Squatting over the track, the man looked closely and noticed something strange. The bear abruptly changed its route and went away. The manager raised a finger and seriously warned that these wild animals are extremely aggressive and never give up so easily. The alchemist girl explained to the hunter, "Unlike ordinary animals, monsters do not run away. They cunningly attack from behind." The hunter noticed fresh tracks and involuntarily tensed. A dangerous beast was wandering too close to the village. The alchemist instantly activated the search magic circle. A small, fluffy sphere fluttered out of her palm. The radar quietly beeped. Target found. She carefreely moved forward, allowing the hunter to follow on the condition of complete silence. The man openly doubted the combat skills of this fragile child, until she nervously smiled, recalling her real, much scarier mentor. A huge bear emerged from behind the trees, lazily scratching the bark with its claws. The group silently sneaked up to it through the thickets. When they looked at the beast almost up close, it continued scratching the bark indifferently and heard no danger. Waiting for the perfect moment to attack, the alchemist casually stated that she would simply break the beast's neck. Her partner stared at her in silent shock. The alchemist calmly clarified that this way they would not damage the valuable materials for collection, leaving her friend blinking in disbelief at the absurdity of the plan. With one powerful jump, the girl flew knee first right into the monster's neck. A loud crack sounded, and the giant carcass instantly fell dead. Sarasa wiped the sweat from her forehead and sighed happily. The rest of the team froze. Jaws dropped. The dark-haired girl began to panic and apologize for her doubts, while Sarasa just calmly waved it off, saying she breakfasts on such monsters. In fact, the alchemist was better at hand-to-hand combat. Weapon training required considerable expenses. The blonde asked confusedly why she needed a sword at all, and Sarasa explained with a smile. Undamaged ingredients cost much more. She always relied on magic and physical strength. Training one's own body could be done absolutely for free, but repairing worn-out weapons always brought her to tears. With skillful movements, Sarasa cut the fiery gland from the still-warm carcass. The big guy, stunned, loudly praised her surgical precision, and the girl was happy. She managed to break the monster's neck before it could burn its gland. While the alchemist skillfully gutted the carcass, the rest of the squad was visibly shaken by this gruesome sight. A row of jars with trophies quickly appeared before them. As Sarasa was about to pull out the eyes as well, the dark-haired companion suddenly realized with horror. Her fiercest enemy, the hellish grizzly, had just been crushed like a fly. Wait a minute. This color... The alchemist suddenly breathed out fearfully. Sarasa hurriedly gathered the innards while they were still freshest, and the stunned Iris just marveled at how quickly she managed everything. In her palm shone the torn-out eye of the hellish grizzly, the very one that should normally be dazzling white. But now it turned out to be blood red. Iris froze confusedly over the fallen monster, not understanding where this terrifying change came from. Darkness skillfully concealed the details. Suddenly, a scream burst out in the mayor's residence. The old head and hunter Jasper turned pale as soon as they heard about the rabies of the infernal grizzlies. The young alchemists grimly confirmed the worst suspicions. The very sound of the beast's name already foretold death. Driven mad by hunger, these fiery giants are capable of burning any human settlement to the ground. Without the beloved magical ore, infernite, the grizzlies abandon their mountains and turn into a pack of ruthless predators. Jasper finished the attendees with a dry fact. The bear he killed was only a scout, and very soon a herd, nearly 100 heads, would crash here. In a glass vial, the proof of their madness bubbled dully. The mayor broke out in a cold sweat. The bear's eye, filled with blood, eerily froze in the liquid. The countdown began from the bottom. The herd will attack in less than a week. The hunter himself will not hold out, and reinforcements from the governor simply will not arrive in time. Hope flared, but immediately faded. Sarasa admitted that her endurance would not be enough for an open, prolonged battle against the entire horde. The peasants with simple hoes gave almost nothing in battle, so the village critically lacked real warriors. While the mayor wept a waterfall of tears over the empty treasury, Sarasa confidently smiled and promised to call her colleagues for help on her own. Sarasa thoughtfully touched her lip and suggested turning to the gatherers for help. Her thought instantly caught the enthusiasm of the girls and tore relief from the old sigh. She decisively slapped the book on the table and voiced the plan: to hire local hunters, promising them all valuable materials from the killed bears. Sarasa quickly sketched drawings on the board and explained how the fire crystal would draw monsters to one point, and there an ambush would await them. The girls calculated. Local hunters would definitely envy the valuable trophies from the killed bears, so luring them into battle would only succeed with a generous reward. The girl smiled warmly and firmly said that she would never abandon her own. The old man anxiously begged her to run and save her own life, while there was still time. But before Sarasa's eyes flashed the faces of the locals, their boundless kindness finally helped her find a true home here. Sarasa firmly said she would never turn away from the people with whom she had already endured so much. Nearby, the friends smiled sincerely and showed thumbs up. They were also ready to fight. Everyone silently leaned over the map of the area. She knew for sure. Together, they would definitely break through. A palm decisively lay on the table. Everyone gathered in the room, briefly and quickly agreeing on the plan to defend their village. The second day of preparation for defense began. The door suddenly opened. Iris and her partner rushed into the shop, both out of breath and carrying bad news. They loudly called the manager. Sarasa shuddered, as if the air had grown colder before a strike. The blonde exhaled. Almost all the gatherers had fled the region. Iris indignantly laid everything out. 2 cowardly mercenaries had blabbed to the village about a fierce grizzly, and the frightened people simply scattered. The swordswoman clenched her teeth guiltily and mentally scolded herself for the clash with the beast, while Sarasa assessed the new scale of the trouble. The manager gently touched her shoulder. If not for Iris, the village would not have had time to learn about the attack at all. To the confused, what to do next, Sarasa smiled cheerfully and assured that everything was under control. But as soon as she looked away, her face twisted with panic. She nervously grabbed her head and with a forced laugh muttered that she very much hoped for exactly that. Sighing bitterly, Sarasa mentally wished for only one thing: to destroy the enemies with a snap of her fingers. Work did not wait. Larea brought lunch straight to the table, where the manager continuously brewed endurance potions and forged fire crystals. Sarasa gratefully nodded in response to the food brought. She confidently stated that she would prepare fiery magical crystals. Sarasa began to finely crush the fragments and simply throw them into the cauldron. Usually the raw materials for this were carefully cleaned of impurities, but Sarasa immediately demonstrated a ready, rough stone. She continued stirring the brew, lightly pouring flame magic into it. Sarasa explained that the hellish grizzly did not care about the quality of the bait, but a failed plan would still mean financial ruin for her. Her friend looked at her, shining with delight. Sarasa only smiled nervously. Sarasa smiled crookedly, admitting her entire business was at stake. She measured the cauldron with her gaze, estimating what exactly was missing for the perfect trap. 2 more batches. Her imagination immediately painted the worst. Complete bankruptcy, a bitter farewell to friends, and a shameful return to work with her mentor. A heavy silence hung. Sarasa sighed resignedly and honestly admitted expenses would only pay off with the carcasses of killed bears. Her friend decisively stepped forward and asked directly how else she could help. She blinked quickly, brushing away tears, and was already ready to go to the end. Sarasa blushed and trembled so touchingly that she barely held back tears from her friend's warm words. Larea was also deeply moved. She blushed and continuously squeezed the fluffy pom-pom in her hands. She firmly squeezed Sarasa's palms and emotionally asked her to stay living in their village forever. But in a moment, the sadness evaporated without a trace, and Sarasa joyfully exclaimed her agreement to the new task. Sarasa instructed Larea to immediately gather, bring, and wash the herbs from the garden, and sincerely, warmly thanked her. While Larea quickly scurried away, the alchemist called Master Heberk. By the newly built fence, Kate and Iris proudly reported that they had taken the task upon themselves and securely fastened the ropes with triple knots. Evaluating the work, Sarasa hoped that this barrier would withstand even the worst development of events. The defense plan was simple and clear. A massive palisade would hold back the bears of the hellfire, and a regular fence would cover the village perimeter. The workers inspired the villagers, and the girl herself grabbed a hammer and began diligently pounding the black ore. She sharply shook her head, driving away untimely pessimistic thoughts. Amid the loud crunch of broken stone, a piercing whistle sounded. On the 4th day of preparation, the long-awaited signal was finally given. With a fighting spirit, Sarasa loudly declared the swift destruction of the bears, while Larea blinked in surprise behind her back. Sarasa slammed the table with a crash and sternly ordered Larea to go upstairs and not to stick out. Handing the girl a signal whistle, she went outside, hoping the barricades would withstand the bear attack. By the wooden palisade, she froze as if rooted to the spot. The peasants had not fled. A confident murmur of voices spread around. The dark-haired warrior already placed her palm on the sword hilt. In the middle of the square, full barrels of water were prudently placed. Andre grinned widely in response to the alchemist's bewildered look. "Yo, Saraso," he called out joyfully and raised his hand. The guys assured one another they would not abandon their friends in trouble. And yes, they were not alone here. Someone among the comrades slyly reminded Sarasa that she seemed to have forgotten to mention someone else. The girl blushed deeply and muttered that she was actually already grown up, but barely held back a happy smile. 2 elder hunters laughed deeply and promised no fleeing from the battlefield, as if they were cowards. The last doubts melted away. Sarasa clenched her fist tightly and pointed to the prepared boxes with healing potions and antidotes. She shouted that together they would definitely defeat the beasts, and the armed crowd responded with a single battle roar. "For our village!" The girl unfolded a magical radar right in the middle of the camp and turned pale at what she saw. She counted 20 targets rapidly approaching. The bears took the bait, a sharp turn to the team, and in order to immediately take battle positions. No retreat. We will have to repel this wave. The bushes cracked apart, releasing angry bears into the clearing. The predators moved forward in a solid wall. One of the monsters loomed over the group like a hairy mountain. A deafening roar tore the air to pieces. The guys behind nervously swallowed air, not expecting such enemy dimensions at all. The girl did not flinch for a moment. She formed her fingers into a gun and fired a power charge. Right on target. A hit with no chance. The projectile struck the beast's muzzle with terrible force. The monster hissed and growled in pain, leaning back and she confidently held her combat stance. The girl involuntarily froze and stared in surprise at her sword. From her strike, the giant bear's head flew off as easily as a cork from a bottle. Removing the shock from her face, she turned to the crowd, which seemed petrified, and with feigned confidence shouted to hold the line. The hellish grizzlies can be defeated. As if in response, two massive beasts tore through the air with a fierce roar. The black-haired warrior raised her weapon and, raising a battle cry, rushed into the attack along with the squad. Huddled together, the fighters struck with their shields and pressed one of the grizzlies tightly against the sharp fence, piercing it with a spear. The black-haired girl exclaimed joyfully when she saw how Kate's arrow perfectly struck the beast right in a vulnerable spot. The swordswoman nervously just smiled, mentally already mourning the 80,000 coins just lost due to the shredded hide. On the roof, the focused archer drew the bowstring again. The lost prophet would have to be compensated with bare eyes. With this thought, the swordswoman cut down another monster with a single stroke. Meanwhile, the black-haired warrior, with a furious scream, drove her blade straight into the eye of the grizzly, pressed against the wall. The carcass heavily thudded to the ground, and the fighters shouted triumphantly. They had finally guessed the tactic, to corner the monster and finish it off together. While the villagers were watering the fences, saving them from fire, hope for victory grew stronger. But the swordswoman suddenly looked around anxiously. The piles of dead bear bodies began to clutter the ground with their dead weight. She, almost breaking down from despair, clenched her teeth. The more monsters they killed, the faster the battlefield became an impassable trap. Andre was breathing heavily after the clash, when suddenly the girl sharply raised her hand and ordered, "Everyone retreat behind the fence." The wooden fence creaked threateningly under the blows of the monsters. She called out to the fighters that half of the enemies were already dead and encouraged the defenders. As soon as they started talking about the strength of the barricades, the air was cut by an alarming whistle. Everyone instantly turned to the desperate cry for help. Someone rushed forward to catch even a glimpse of where exactly the breach occurred. A deafening roar sounded, making the air tremble. The girl cried out her friend's name in horror. Iris was thrown back with a scream, rolling on her back across the ground. Clutching a shard of a broken sword in her hands, Iris assured that everything was fine and nodded forward. Now it was her friend's turn. From the cloud of dust emerged a giant, four-armed bear, fiercely baring its jaws. The girl took a deep breath and, with an unexpected smile, ordered the boys to lead the fighters away and save the wounded. She confidently shifted her gaze to the giant and declared that she would deal with him herself. The fighters immediately rushed to carry out the order, pushing other monsters away from the damaged fences. The young man shouted that they would return as soon as possible. Black-haired Iris clenched her teeth and nodded briefly. The blonde sent her to assist the others, while she herself grabbed the sword and tensely listened to the vibration of the earth. With a deafening roar, a giant grizzly rose before her. The girl was covered in sweat and took a cautious step back. But in a moment, she suddenly dashed forward, shooting a water ball. The spell hit the monster right in its gaping jaws. While the bear, blinded by the blow, blindly recoiled, she flashed past its massive body. The sword sliced through the air with a whistle, but the blade only slid over the tough hide, leaving a tiny scratch. The beast instantly swung back in response. The giant paw crushed the stones, but the blonde had already softly landed farther away. She smiled boldly, anticipating a huge profit from the rare parts of this monster. Although she perfectly understood, if the magic ran out and even one hit landed, only a bloody stain would remain of her. She circled around the giant bear with quick jumps. The beast confusedly twisted its head, searching for her with its gaze. But that girl had already appeared right next to him. A fierce scream sounded. A powerful energy blast hit the monster right in the mouth. The stunned beast sharpened itself, and she closely discharged a double power shot into its chest. With a lightning strike of the sword, she sliced the enemy, and blood splattered in all directions. The huge carcass fell to the ground with a crash, and the exhausted victor was already reaching for the bag. She was heavily gasping for air and barely standing on her feet. With one gulp, the girl drained the vial of potion. Her fingers feverishly fumbled in search of the next bottle. Suddenly darkness covered. A piercing impulse of pain tore through the body. Consciousness shattered into pieces from unbearable agony. A dark blade sliced through the air. She swallowed the potion and grimaced, to the point of tears, from its incredible bitterness. A thought even flashed in her mind. to add some honey there so that the drink would sell more willingly. The battle did not subside. People near the palisade desperately held back the onslaught of giant grizzlies. The girl quickly looked around, searching for where trouble might come from. Drawing her sword, she rushed around to strike the monsters in the backs. But suddenly the air was cut by a new, piercing whistle. She chilled at the thought. All the hunters were fighting nearby, but one of the beasts still broke through the defense. Thinking grimly, she realized, if all the fighters hold back the beasts on this side, then one grizzly will inevitably break through the defense elsewhere. An alarming signal comes directly from the side of her house. Horrified to realize that little Larea was trapped there, she dashed off to help at full speed. The girl joyfully rushed forward, shouting her friend's name. Running past, she suddenly stunned her companions with a scream. Her own shop was under attack. The bewildered archer just froze in confusion, staring at her wide-eyed. The local soldiers quickly encouraged the girl, promising to drive the bears back to the mountains on their own. But suddenly, she let out a sharp scream of horror. The girl dashed home at full speed, not believing that the beasts had broken through the barriers. She was met by a completely shattered, massive fence. The newly restored garden and carefully tended yard had now become total ruins. With despair, she looked at the huge snout of the culprit and mourned her own home in her thoughts. While the bear brazenly rummaged through the debris, she clenched her fist until it cracked. The beast twitched in surprise, turned around, and froze, seeing her right behind its back. The girl's eyes darkened with rage, and she promised through her teeth to tear him to pieces. The predator roared and swung its massive paw, but she easily, almost effortlessly, dived aside and avoided the blow. Her gaze flared maniacally, and in a moment she struck him with a devastating sword blow in one lightning-fast move. Sarasa burst out of the house in a flash, breaking her way through the rubble with a crash. The air was cut by a sharp jerk. The black bear monster stared at her in surprise, but in a moment it came to its senses and grinned confidently, gathering strength for a strike. The beast tensed and focused, as if before a leap. Its silhouette blurred for a second from the effort. A sinister smile stubbornly did not disappear from the enemy's snout. In vain, Sarasa, running, delivered a devastating kick right to its swollen belly. The creature was thrown back like a rag, and the girl fiercely shouted at the pyromaniacs, feverishly searching for Larea with her eyes. "My perfect lawn!" Sarasa shouted madly and raised her fist over the beaten enemy. A dull blow harshly pressed the monster into the ground. Immediately after that, a lightning-fast vertical strike tossed the heavy carcass high into the sky. On the house steps, tearful Larea finally appeared. The girls sighed with relief, seeing each other alive. Hearing that there might still be enemies outside, Sarasa ordered her friend to hide, and with a manic gleam in her eyes, set off to make a real slaughter. Sarasa blinked in confusion, casting a glance at the people near the broken palisade. Behind the wooden debris stood the black bodies of the slain monsters. The men exchanged words of relief among themselves. The morning sun broke through the clouds. The fight was finally over. A new day had come, and only the shattered shop fence silently reminded of the night attack. Birds sang carefree over the yard. In the bedroom, the exhausted Sarasa trembled under the blanket, plaintively begging Larea to bring water. The girl trembled from exhaustion, left after all she had endured. As Larea raised the glass, Sarasa's body was pierced by a dreadful cramp, and she screamed wildly. Her friend rushed to help, quickly arranging her so she could sit more comfortably in bed. When Larea asked about the bear attack, Sarasa admitted. All fear immediately receded with her appearance. Sarasa laughed joyfully, glowing with warmth beside her friends. Her face became calmer, and she smiled thoughtfully, preparing to give credit to each one. She smiled warmly and added that in this victory there was a huge merit of everyone. Larea smiled radiantly, as if to say, it was thanks to Sarasa's medicines that the villagers survived the bear attack without losing anyone in a terrible way. The alchemist raised her nose, boasting about her impenetrable protective seals, but Larea dryly reminded her about the hole in the wall that the beasts had indeed left. Sarasa awkwardly looked away and honestly admitted, if not for her friend's help, she wouldn't have managed. After that, she brewed potions until completely exhausted, so the healing supplies were enough for all the wounded. The girl was most pleased that she had managed to prepare complex alchemical antidotes in advance. Suddenly, there was a loud noise behind the door. Sarasa was just complaining about how awkward it was to receive care from younger Lorea. Iris flew joyfully into the room with a basket of wild strawberries, followed timidly by Kate. Fully healed, Iris clenched her fists resolutely and began to beg for at least some work to repay the debt for her rescue. Kate panicked, realizing they couldn't afford the rent as well, but Sarasa immediately stopped her. The alchemist suggested they simply move into her shop. The gatherers exchanged surprised glances, listening to the simple terms. Free roof over their heads in exchange for regular supply of materials. Sarasa clenched her fists hopefully and asked them to become her first official employees. Iris bowed respectfully, and Kate with a broad smile promised never to let the new manager down. Sarasa tearfully shed a tear. Finally, she had found her own reliable team. The girls gathered by the bed, rejoicing in their shared happy time, and Sarasa, with warmth in her heart, understood. From now on, her cozy shop would become much livelier. She loudly shouted, "Hooray!" to everyone on board her alchemical shop, and in the frame, the friends amusingly bumped foreheads while running. Long before Sarasa appeared in the village of Yoke, the daily life dragged on with gray threads, slowly and without a glimpse of light. Lorea stood on the porch of her shop, vainly squinting against the icy wind. Turning back behind the counter, she sadly propped her cheeks with her hands. In such a dead season, there was no point in waiting for customers. Suddenly, the sky was pierced by a deaf wall of rain. Heavy drops monotonously drummed on the leaves. The sleepy silence was suddenly torn apart by the appearance of a tall figure in a long cloak. In the semi-darkness, small sparks barely glimmered. On the black fabric, a white floral ornament stood out sharply. Embroidered branches twisted fancifully on the edges of the garment, like living vines. The double doors slammed open with a crash. A heavy boot echoed as it pressed into the wooden floor. Lorea turned pale, twitched, and nervously forced out a greeting. Her hand instinctively twitched toward the signal bell, calling for help. From the stranger radiated a pure threat, but the girl froze in horror. Her heart pounded wildly, while the guest under the hood simply silently loomed over her. Her chest thumped as if it was about to burst, and cold sweat rolled down her cheek. The girl exhaled with relief behind the counter, and only then did the figure in the cloak silently emerge nearby. The stranger nodded towards the shelf and directly asked if the potions were in those bottles. The girl froze in confusion. Could it be that the gatherer is sniffing out new hunting grounds? She nodded, and immediately shifted the conversation to the village itself. As soon as it became known that unwanted potions here have to be simply thrown away due to lack of buyers, the figure in the cloak sighed in disappointment. The girl admitted, "Without the local alchemist, outsiders can't earn money here, but the village is perfect for a peaceful life." The client politely thanked for the explanation. A barely noticeable satisfied smile slipped from beneath the deep hood. She thoughtfully inquired whether it was easy to settle here. Promising to return soon, the mysterious guest headed towards the door. Later, the girl eagerly recounted how that very evening she tried to find the client, but she simply vanished into thin air. She paused for a moment in thought, having found no threat in her behavior. This story, almost between sips of tea, greatly intrigued her friend. Over tea, Lorea confessed with concern. The mysterious guest had not registered at the hotel and had not stayed with any of the neighbors. The friend assumed that she simply went home. That evening it was pouring like from a bucket. In such a downpour, no one would dare to set off on a long journey. And suddenly Lorea remembered one more eerie detail. As soon as the client came in from the street, there was not a single wet trace left on the doormat. Moreover, she communicated exclusively with her. Her friend asked in horror if it was a ghost, and Lorea panicked and started waving her hands, assuring that she had asked people about her. A tense silence hung. Both nervously swallowed their saliva. Lorea tried to squeeze out at least some rational explanation. The stranger was wearing an inconspicuous cloak, so she could very well have simply not been remembered. But the interlocutor completely demolished this version. Without a carriage, the road to the city would have taken several days, and for spending the night in the forest, the guest was dressed too lightly. She asked suspiciously what exactly the woman looked like. Lorea's cheeks instantly flushed. She even laughed inwardly at the dreamy memories of the tall, beautiful figure. Beyond the empty teacups, the conversation slowly petered out, and the mysterious visitor of that rainy evening remained an unsolved mystery. Her friend sighed wearily, and everything fell into place. This mysticism did not appear by itself. It was fueled by sudden infatuation. The girls froze in surprise and cautiously looked around the cleared area nearby. Now behind the wall of their shop gaped a huge hole. Friends gloomily summed up the destruction. Several pierced facades, one half ruined, and one in the village that burned to the ground. There was only guessing left as to how the other buildings survived the attack. The Sarasa shop suffered the most, but it was still somewhat comforting that the neighboring houses that collapsed stood empty. To start repairs, money was needed, so the girl decisively went to the elder's house. She already had a clear plan. The elder greeted the guest with a warm, friendly smile. Over a cup of tea, he kindly inquired how she was feeling. Sarasa immediately got down to business. She needed to sell alchemical ingredients and distribute money to the villagers and mercenaries who remained to hold the defense. The moment came to negotiate the division of the main trophy, the carcass of the Hellfire Bears. To her great surprise, the elder simply allowed her to take all the collected materials. Sarasa confusedly suggested keeping at least 40% for herself, but the man stopped her with a hand. With warm gratitude, he assured her that no villager would dare reproach her. The mayor sat opposite Sarasa and showered her with thanks. She personally laid most of the grizzlies, although the girl modestly waved it off, denying her merits. While they talked, work was already bustling outside. Villagers began dismantling the monster carcasses and were horrified by the size of the torn skins. The elder cautiously inquired whether the young alchemist would yield this loot for the benefit of the village. The sale of meat and fur should more than cover the repair and the gatherer's services, and Sarasa agreed without hesitation. But suddenly the mayor grew gloomy. He immediately grasped the main problem. The meat can be salted, but what about the skins? He sighed heavily, admitting, selling such a mountain of material would be extremely difficult. Usually, Lorea's father, Darna, handled external trade, but even for his shop, this was already too much. Then Sarasa decisively struck her chest and declared that she would personally deal with the skins. The elder almost cried with happiness, calling her a savior, and the girl only smiled determinedly. Soon she was already returning to her native shop. Laying out the loot, Sarasa set about sorting the fur. In total, 28 pieces were gathered. She was quite satisfied with the sorting. 7 perfect, 10 good, and the rest went as an acceptable option. Her work was interrupted by a terrible stench. Lorea pinched her nose, and Sarasa awkwardly mumbled about the specifics of alchemical aromas. The assistant could only resign herself. The mistress had bought all the skins of the infernal grizzlies to rescue the mayor from trouble. The alchemist smiled warmly at Lorea, rummaging through her own basket. Having seen her friend off the door, she decided to remain silent. The money given to her was, essentially, payment for the pelts. Next to the counter, Sarasa was negotiating about a heavy load of pelts, assuring that she could handle it herself. The door closed. Left alone, the girl joyfully announced the start of preparations and proudly stood before the giant cauldron. One precise flick of a finger, and a magical fire instantly flared under the stove. The necessary potion flowed into the cauldron in a thin stream. Then she poured a full bucket of water there with a swing. Grabbing a large spatula, the girl began vigorously stirring the boiling brew. Manual tanning would have taken a lot of time, but alchemy did its job. It easily and even cheerfully washed the wool. The result was perfect. The dirt came off, and the acrid stench vanished without a trace. The patterns on the black metal of the cauldron brightly flared and flashed for a moment. Spreading another pelt before her, Sarasa held her gaze on it and thoughtfully considered what to tackle next. The brew was boiling again in the cauldron, and alchemy was slowly cleaning the wool immersed inside. Sarasa stoked the fire under the cauldron and began processing the next batch of fur. Sarasa focused on stirring the brew in the cauldron, pouring in magic to dissolve all the excess. With one motion, she joyfully pulled the perfectly clean hide out of the water. But summer was ahead, and the fiery fur risked simply gathering dust in the warehouse. Suddenly the girl was struck with an idea. A familiar merchant from the capital promised to buy any goods at a good price. Soon the magic circle brightly flared and spat out packages with the long-awaited payment. For her trophies, Sarasa received cash and ingredients, and exchanged one of the hides specifically for warm grass seeds. Lorea returned to the shop and found her friend reading a letter. Just learned about the crazy amount. The girl began scolding Sarasa for dangerous solo trips with money. until she noticed a familiar trophy on the table. It was the very same bearskin, and the alchemist suggested evaluating the result. Lorea timidly stretched out her hands and gasped with delight. The fur turned out to be surprisingly fluffy. The monster's stench disappeared, and the skin barely warmed the palms. Sarasa assured that a winter coat made from such material would be a real stove, and Lorea immediately daydreamed, imagining herself in this cozy outfit. Both friends gasped with delight, unable to tear themselves away from the surprisingly fluffy fur. Sarasa loudly thanked, and her dark-haired companion immediately began helping to pack the things. Sarasa estimated the obtained fur could be sold as fabric right now. For tailors, winter comes early. Sweetly stretching, Sarasa exhaled with satisfaction. She finally gathered money for tomorrow's shop repair, but the girl suddenly interrupted her, wanting to suggest something. Alongside the dull knocking, the wooden box finally settled in place. Packing was completed. A proposal? Sarasa blinked in surprise, and her friend in response looked unusually serious and unwavering. Still smiling, Lorea unexpectedly suggested to build something new for their shop. Sarasa froze, confused. Next to the brick sink stood a massive stove covered with magical seals. A black stove and a cozy tea set became the first strokes on the sketch of their future kitchen. But the house owner uncertainly reminded that technically she already had a kitchen. Sarasa lit up with excitement as soon as she imagined what the dream kitchen would be like. The alchemist joyfully objected. Since there is neither a stove nor a kettle here, this is the best chance to build everything from scratch. Her friend irritably clarified that a real kitchen was needed for cooking, and this only caused surprise. The girl blinked in confusion. Glancing over the completely empty kitchen, one girl cheerfully volunteered to cook, while the other awkwardly admitted she couldn't cook properly. At dinner, they agreed to cook together. As soon as Iris and Kate arrived, shared meals would noticeably save money. Suddenly, the wall crashed apart. In a cloud of dust emerged a huge silhouette with a hammer who loudly supported their idea. The girl's eyes shone with delight. She joyfully clenched her fists and was ready to get to work immediately. A familiar carpenter, Heberk, entered the room. His professional pride would not allow him to leave the local heroine's house damaged. While the master laid out his tools and promised to update the furniture at the same time, the girls enthusiastically began planning the kitchen utensils. Sarasa suggested Lorea ask for anything for their new kitchen, promising to show the true power of alchemy. In response, Lorea modestly stammered about a regular stove. The alchemist happily noted the order and immediately promised to make a magical version. As soon as she suggested an automatic water pump as well, Lorea waved her hands in fear. Even a simple well was already an incredible luxury for her. The idea of adding a bread oven finally threw the girl into a panic. She had only seen such expensive things in the main city bakery. Despite her friend's shock, Sarasa calmly added a refrigerator with a freezer to the list, calling it a great exercise for her skills. She proudly lifted the board with the final plan, decisively deciding not to skimp on conveniences. With a heavy clatter, the iron stove fell to the ground, and the girls politely thanked Master Jizdo for the materials. Having taken the order, they headed without delay to the local smithy. The surprised master and his assistant froze confusedly at the threshold. Nearby, with a basket in her hands, the assistant also gaped in bewilderment. Straight towards them, puffing from the effort and counting steps, Sarasa and Lorea were dragging the heavy metal across the ground on their own. Along the way, the townspeople silently watched the girls who stubbornly pushed the heavy iron burden all the way to the smithy. The blacksmith Dilal only smiled kindly when the alchemist briskly reported she had already brought the base needed for the magical furnace. Hearing this, the woman with the basket peeked out from behind the doorframe with interest. The girl enthusiastically presented the magical stove. No open flame, no stuffiness in summer, and full control over the heat. The bakery owner had just envied such convenience a moment ago. The alchemist happily estimated in her mind that similar artifacts usually cost from 20 to 30,000. The woman asked in shock, clarifying the stated amount. 12,000? She sighed heavily, admitting, "The thing is incredibly useful, but too expensive." Having examined the huge stone oven of the establishment, the girl clarified that the price also depends on commercial use and delivery. The owner estimated the new cost, and suddenly the alchemist panicked. She did not even notice how she automatically switched to the mode of a pushy seller. The woman sternly ordered her not to pressure herself. The girl froze in fear, and the baker cheerfully winked, "We'll take it." no daily hassle with purchasing and chopping wood. And this purchase turned out to be simply incredibly profitable. She proudly declared that she and her husband would easily master the artifact. But the girl anxiously reminded her, "You need to infuse your own magic into it." The alchemist calmed her down and explained that the magical crystal inside would last for 30 years of work. The deal went smoothly, without any hiccups. The girl immediately offered 2 stoves at a discount for $27,000. Nearby, Lorea was ecstatic with joy, impressed by how skillfully her friend managed to close such a large sale. She happily clenched her fists. This was the very dreamed-of big order, into which she vowed to put her whole soul. The assistant joyfully clenched her fists and exclaimed that everything went wonderfully for Sarasa. Meanwhile, the gatherer returned to the shop, proudly carrying a whole basket of fresh forest mushrooms. Work on the magical oven began with the base. The compass smoothly drew a perfect circle on the iron plate. Sarasa dipped the quill into the shining ink and focused on transferring the pentagram from the alchemical guide onto the metal. The friend watched the process mesmerized, and barely holding her breath, murmured that drawing runes looked extremely complicated. The alchemist did not break away from her work, and calmly objected. For her, it was a usual matter. Sarasa gladly showed her friend the finished, evenly inscribed rune plate. Next, she firmly pressed the heavy tool to the marked point on the metal. A loud clatter spread through the workshop. The girl skillfully punched the necessary hole in the metal with the heavy tool. Together, they carefully folded the 2 painted plates together, and they joined with a characteristic click. The finished panel was securely pressed into a large wooden box. It had been pre-insulated with special clay and equipped with a temperature lever. Sarasa exhaled with relief as soon as the heavy construction was lowered directly into the huge cauldron. At that very moment, the container illuminated the room with a bright magical flash, and the assistant gasped with excitement. The last touch remained, to pour resin into the gaps to make everything waterproof, and the brand new furnace would be completely ready for work. With a dull thud, the guidebook closed. The work was finally completed. The cook and his assistant exhaled excitedly in unison, once again carefully examining the finished product. Outside, near the house, birds chirped quietly, as if emphasizing the calm of the moment. Sarasa presented them with the finished magical plate. She built a convenient cabinet underneath, and now the temperature could be set with a simple slider. The girl showed the settings, explaining that the right edge of the scale gives the strongest fire. Winking, she stated that the magic itself fuels the stove, and advised the cook to immediately try it in practice. The cook leaned over the stove with interest, figuring out exactly how to start it. The man confidently grabbed the frying pan and skillfully tossed the vegetables right over the new burner. Only a few seconds passed. A fresh, hot dish was already steaming on the plate. A piece of butter instantly melted with a loud sizzle on the heated metal. The cook exclaimed with pleasure that everything works perfectly, and the woman nearby even clapped her hands with delight. She immediately reminded that the mayor recently paid generous compensations to the peasants for the attack of the hellish grizzly, and that money appeared to them exclusively thanks to Sarasa. Amid joyful jingling, the woman handed the craftswoman plump bags with payment, although the girl, confused by such an amount, hastily offered an installment plan. But the customers did not even think about saving. They only smiled warmly and sincerely thanked her for the excellent work. Sarasa and her friend were slowly pulling the empty cart along the road. Suddenly, they were surrounded by a crowd of peasants who took turns thanking the girl for saving their relatives. Joyful greetings came from all sides. One of the men, beaming with satisfaction, praised her healing potions and that remarkably convenient idea of returning empty bottles. And then, without losing his smile, he simply slipped a ripe apple into her hands. Sarasa was confused, but her friend immediately reassured her. People are truly, sincerely, and wholeheartedly grateful to her. It turned out that the villagers had long wanted to repay her, but due to injuries and daily worries, they never found the opportunity. Looking at their warm smiles, the girl finally understood. The villagers had truly accepted her. Nearby stood smiling villagers, those who had long accepted the girl as their own with all their heart. She froze emotionally, clutching the apple in her hands. Meanwhile, the villagers, with joyful chatter, loaded their cart with a whole pile of fresh vegetables. Later, training boiled over in the yard of the shop. The girl was practicing heavy sword strikes with a loud cry. Meanwhile, the building itself continued to be renovated. New sturdy doors appeared there solemnly. Next, even shiny new furniture, as if just brought out from a treasury. In the room, a brand new magical stove gleamed, delighting the eyes. 3 girls were enchantedly examining the newly arranged kitchen. They praised the work of the craftsman in turn, emotionally noting every detail in the interior. Luria was glowing with joy. Her new kitchen turned out even better than she had dreamed. Her friend in the beret suddenly reached into her bag and called Luria. Then she handed her a thick recipe book with silver embossing. The girl froze in surprise. She pressed the gift firmly to her chest and solemnly promised she would cook the most delicious dishes for everyone. As it turned out, this tome was sent through a magical portal by her master. At such news, Luria shone even brighter. To immediately test the stove in action, the friend suggested boiling water, and for tea, she took out a whole bag of fresh cookies, just bought in southern Straz. The crisp crunch of the sweets echoed through the room. All 3 finally sat down at the table and savored warm tea and perfect coziness. The girls gladly devoured the treats, praising the familiar taste. The little one happily offered them seconds. For tea, something sweet was definitely needed. Suddenly, the girl in the beret twitched and froze. She felt she had forgotten something extremely important. The girls eagerly discussed the new cookie flavor, and did not notice at all how someone was already hurrying along the path to the shop. But as soon as he appeared, the anxiety instantly melted away with another tasty piece. The door was abruptly thrown open, and on the threshold, as if having lifted a burden from her shoulders, Iris appeared. She asked to go to the bathroom right from the doorstep, but halfway through the sentence, she froze in shock. Right in front of her was a large plate of cookies, and next to it, freshly brewed tea. Iris stood frozen in the doorway, staring dumbfounded at the table set without her. The whole trio at the table froze guiltily, clutching their cups. The dark-haired girl panicked and grabbed her cheeks. She had completely forgotten to invite Iris to the table, so now she ominously loomed over them. The deceived girl trembled with rage. She clenched her fists painfully. The friend in the beret desperately waved her hands, justifying that this was no tea party. It was just a coincidence. The dark-haired girl clenched her fists, tears glistening in her eyes, and burst out shouting, demanding her share of the treats. Iris's gaze instantly fixed on the cookie, the one someone was holding in their hand. Kate, smiling, gently assured that there were plenty of cookies left, and extended a full plate. In despair, she sharply snatched the cookie right from someone else's hands. "Then I'll do this." She shoved the loot into her mouth with a swing, greatly frightening the blonde. The girl chewed fiercely, and on her face, anger visibly turned into complete gastronomic bliss. Of course, in her haste, she choked and started coughing, while her worried friend rushed to give her water. The shop owner couldn't hold back. She quietly snorted, suppressing laughter. The chaos in the room only intensified. Another girl choked. A new fuss over tea flared up, and the dark-haired culprit of the commotion awkwardly apologized. Suddenly, the shop owner laughed sincerely and loudly, and everyone around froze in surprise. Her laughter was instantly picked up by others. Within a moment, the whole group of 4 was joyfully laughing together. Cheered up, they all settled down together to the shared treat, and time seemed to fly faster. Finally, the long-awaited idyll set in. The girls with blissful faces began on the desserts. Watching them, the hostess smiled warmly. She decided to run the business so that both friends and all villagers could enjoy life every day. In the bright kitchen, the smiling chef and assistant skillfully prepared dishes, carefully seeking out every pleasant detail. And far from here, in a damp cave, 2 adventurers were clutching the life-saving alchemical potion with visible relief. The shop, Sarasa, worked tirelessly for daily needs, and its little owner, frowning loudly and comically, shouted at her friends, strictly forbidding them to go on adventures without her. This time, their attention was caught by a bizarre beast with bat wings. On the table, they unfolded a wanted poster. They desperately needed the fangs of the ice bat. Sarasa explained to her friends, these very fangs would become the perfect freezer for their renovated kitchen. But there was one problem. The girls did not know the forest at all, and the local gatherers, for some reason, did not bring such prey. Replacing everything with magical crystals would mean it was both too expensive and too long. At that very moment, the door opened, and a familiar trio of veteran hunters burst inside. The guys immediately appreciated the fresh renovation, and Sarasa modestly gave credit to the work of local craftsmen. Wasting no time, the girl immediately asked Andre about those very bats. Andre first pulled out a completely inappropriate story from his head about a bandit raid near the shop, and there was no connection to bats in it. But he immediately lit up. He confidently remembered that their territory extended somewhere in the northern caves, although a second before that he was blinking confusedly. Until Gil suggested to him the invention of another mercenary. Sarasa showed a drawing on a poster, and Andre immediately nodded confidently. It was definitely the same predator. Why then did no one catch them? It turned out the answer was quite funny. These things simply were not sold on the market. Andre awkwardly scratched the back of his head. He himself had never hunted such monsters, but immediately realized alchemists would definitely need these long-lasting ingredients. The eyeglass maker said with a smile that trophies were always considered useless. Supposedly, collecting them was unprofitable. Sarasa poked a finger at a poster with a dubious merchant, and the mercenary suddenly understood. He irritably grabbed his head. The deception was revealed, although the girl suggested that the fraudster might have told the truth. Meanwhile, Kate hesitantly shuffled next to Sarasa, unable to dare to join the men's conversation. The conversation was interrupted by a timidly raised hand. A magical illustration from the reference book unfolded before their eyes. She wore ice-fanged bats, ordinary inhabitants of deep caves. These creatures did not attack people. Instead, they instantly froze fruits with their fangs. This is exactly how they made food supplies for the cold winter. The value of their fangs depended on the strength of the frost. So the young ones, up to 5 years old, were generally worthless. But due to their crazy reproduction, these innocent creatures turned into a real curse for fruit orchard owners. Sarasa admitted, only the appraiser Leonora could accurately determine the age of their prey. Suddenly the girl froze, pondering whether there was a way to find out this on her own. The mercenary, meanwhile, sighed resignedly, regretting that he was unable to change anything. The girl put on the scholar's hat and joyfully declared that they were heading straight to field practice, directly into the bat caves. Andre hesitated and tried to refuse as gently as possible, hinting that she was too weak. But she shone even brighter. She desperately needed the fangs of these monsters. The boy laughed awkwardly and quickly corrected himself, admitting that such a battle girl definitely should not be judged by appearance. Before his eyes, that moment was still frozen. She mercilessly crushed the giant monster. "Do I really look like I don't know how to fight?" she protested, and Andre nodded without any hesitation. The display of strength ended with a pitiful trembling. Under the weight of 2 buckets, she simply could not hold on. So she was left to puff her cheeks amusingly out of offense. Moving on to planning, the girl reminded that bats sleep soundly under the ceiling during the day, and then she completely puzzled Andre by advising him to take an umbrella with him. The boy's imagination instantly painted a downpour of droppings, while the girl smiled, warning everyone about the expected chocolate rain. Only it turned out that in their company, there were neither luxurious umbrellas nor even ordinary raincoats. The girl smiled slyly and summoned the magical air shield. The barrier perfectly repelled dirt, but Andre realized with horror all the reflected filth would fly straight at those standing near the dome. Then she grabbed the fully packed backpack, and the guy grimly agreed to the adventure. And the girl was genuinely surprised at how quickly he figured out her subtle metaphor about chocolate. The young man with the bandage, businesslike, advised to stock up on raincoats for the future, and his partner eagerly agreed. They really did not want to stink of filth again. The bitter truth finally dawned on him. Despite all those strange hints about chocolate. Sudden enlightenment. The girl froze, her mouth agape in shock. Setting off on errands, the girls entrusted Lorea to watch over the shop and not to give any troublemakers a break. Calling out goodbye, the company set off on the road, and Lorea stayed behind, waving cheerfully to them from the shop's threshold. The blonde doubted whether they could manage the hunt without backup, but the manager quickly reassured her. The local bats were weak. One of the mercenaries tensely warned to stay alert. These bats once froze careless people to death. They also did not blow up the entrance with dynamite. The noise would have driven the swarm mad and torn them apart with their icy fangs. The young woman unfolded a magical air wall and decisively led the squad into the darkness. The dark-haired archer suddenly bent in half. The unbearable stench struck right into her gut. While the girls nearly fainted from the smell, the experienced mercenaries behind remained completely calm. The manager calmly explained that alchemical ingredients smell much worse, and this caused genuine surprise in the blonde. When she heard that she would have to pay for the remedy, the brunette fell to her knees in despair, lamenting her eternal debt. But even despite the price, with trembling hands, she desperately reached for the vial. The little one laughed and handed over the jar, as if free things were a usual matter. The stench instantly receded, and the girl proudly explained that the potion finally filters the air, without completely taking away the sense of smell. She offered the perfume to the mercenaries, but they gladly refused. The blonde blissfully folded her hands in gratitude to Alchemy, ignoring the little one's dry reminder that it was a one-time charity. The men laughed cheerfully and admitted, for the sake of an argument, they sometimes go weeks without washing. And at these words, the manager imagined with horror the real stench of the big world. The dark-haired girl suddenly screamed, raising her eyes in shock. Her companion remained calm, and without changing her tone, pointed upwards, as if to say, "Let's switch to something less frightening." The whole group froze in place, staring confusedly at the cave ceiling. In the darkness, a shaggy silhouette slowly emerged. The edge of a leathery wing caught the eye. The sharp ears of the sleeping monster twitched from the silence. The creatures pressed against each other, as if they were afraid even of their own rustling. The ceiling was solid, covered without a single gap by thousands of bats. The blonde woman trembled in despair and declared that among this mass there was not a single 5-year-old specimen. But the girl with the staff stubbornly urged not to give up. Just a short wave, and the magical charge accurately knocked down one of the monsters. Winking smugly, she explained that older bats have more mana, and immediately lost the advantage, receiving a sarcastic response from the rest of the group. They simply do not see magic. Then the sorceress lifted the carcass by the wing, demonstrating visually, age is simply revealed by larger size. According to her, the target could be recognized without difficulty, only by the length of the body. But already after a moment she smiled awkwardly and offered a better solution, to compare their fangs. The group peered into the depths of the cave, searching with their eyes for large bats, but to Sarasa they all looked absolutely the same. The girl leaned over the dead beast and explained, "The fangs of the young remain light, while in old specimens they take on a deep blue color." She bluntly opened the monster's jaws to show everything clearly and without unnecessary words. With a confident smile, Sarasa pulled off the glove. The fangs were really supposed to instantly burn bare fingers with cold. Sarasa cheerfully announced the second trait of valuable bats, their devastating icy power. But as soon as she touched the tooth, she comically trembled from the icy pain and loudly abandoned her own idea. Kate smiled and said that the fangs of 5-year-old monsters freeze flesh in seconds, and, as if joking, handed the prey to Iris. The growth rings were clearly visible at the root of the tooth. Gil looked closely and counted exactly 5. In an instant, the magic of light flared. Its reflection illuminated the fang, allowing the structure to be seen down to the smallest details. Sarasa briskly showed how to safely extract the prey, grasped the jaw from above to avoid pricking on the sharp tips. She joyfully clenched her fist at such simplicity, until Gil dryly stopped her. 5 rings meant 6 years of age. Having finished with the catch, Kate, with a magical gust of wind, threw the carcass out of the cave, so it wouldn't rot inside. Gil suggested safely shooting monsters from a distance, but his partner immediately shook his head. Risking a collapse of the vault was not allowed. Iris confessed confusedly that in the darkness she wouldn't be able to distinguish small differences between bats, and hopefully asked Kate, "Tell me, what will we do?" Kate quickly reassured her companion. Young bats hang right by the entrance, so now there's no need to pick targets. However, the real, truly great prize was hidden much deeper inside. Joyfully raising her sword, she led the squad into the darkness. No one intended to waste strength on trifles. The descent lasted a long 2 hours, and suddenly a giant bat loomed above them. Startled by the surprise, the squad immediately froze. The manageress barely stood on her feet, exhausted to the limit. She helplessly sank onto the stones while the girl triumphed. Finally, they reached the right place. Assessing the size of the fangs, the alchemist excitedly, sharply ordered to start the cleanup. At the manageress's question whether this catch would be enough, the girl playfully winked. They were still a bit short of the full quota. But then, one of the mercenaries raised a finger and objected, saying they were not just lucky, but very much so. Depressed, Sarasa stared into the vial of potion, while being reminded, one should not speak like that. Life is worth much more. Exhausted, Sarasa caught her breath on the stones, while the gatherer men quietly conversed among themselves. weighing the loot. And just as the boy remembered the precious potion left for him, the alchemist only slyly smiled. She had nothing to pay with, but her skills easily found a way out. The woman with angel wings gently took Iris by the hands and assured her that her life was more valuable than any most precious potion. Iris froze with tears of emotion, while her small companion in a beret only sighed skeptically. Caught by this gesture, Iris instantly ignited with fighting spirit and clenched her fists tightly, imagining how to reach the bats on the ceiling with the sword. The tall, elven archer suddenly loomed over Iris, promising to cover her rear. This almost made her jump in fright. The squad quickly and coherently lined up in battle formation. As soon as they moved, the very first arrow with a whistle knocked down a bat right in flight. The archer and the girl mage struck simultaneously, mercilessly shooting monsters with both magic and arrows. A fierce battle boiled in the cave. The adventurers were fending off a black swarm attacking from all sides. As soon as everything calmed down, the mercenaries calmly began to collect the winged trophies into large sacks. Iris's eyes lit up joyfully. She sharply dashed forward with her blade, striking a pompous, victorious pose before her surprised companions. Around them, whole mountains of dead bats already towered. The team cheerfully unfolded empty bags. It was time to tear out the monster's fangs. Standing over a pile of bats, the squad began arguing about the correct way to pull Monster's fangs. The man looked doubtfully at Sarasa's hands and asked if it was safe for her to work in such gear. He distrustfully crumpled the overly thin fabric with his fingers. The craftswoman handed her the materials, nodding that she had thought through all the dangers in advance. The girl smiled joyfully and proudly declared that these were her own handmade, flexible gloves. She confidently spread her fingers, showing the perfect fit on her hand. This simple, alchemical item, reliably protected against cuts, was suitable for delicate work and cost over 3,000 coins. Intrigued, the collector immediately asked, "Try them on." Putting on the glove, he involuntarily exclaimed with delight. The material did not restrict movement at all. The man worriedly suggested that the artifact might drain mana, but the girl instantly dismissed these concerns. Sarasa explained that she wore them constantly while brewing potions. The fabric did not interfere with muscle work in any way. The client enthusiastically twisted his arm, hoping the protection would withstand bat fangs, and directly asked the price. The alchemist mentally calculated delivery from the capital. To avoid losses, she would have to ask for 3,800 coins and sell them in batches of 10. But the man did not even blink upon hearing the amount, so Sarasa immediately offered a wholesale discount with a sly smile. The collector happily promised to persuade other hunters to buy. After the bear hunt, people still had extra money, and such protection in caves would be a real salvation. It took a whole hour of exhausting work to pull out the fangs. A mountain of shiny trophies rose before Sarasa. Sarasa busied herself carefully sorting and laying out the obtained fangs on the cloth. The collector offered to sell his share of the loot immediately after returning to the shop. Sarasa easily agreed. The boy wanted to object to something else, saying that all the hard work was on her, but the girl just waved her hand. That's how it should be. Payment for the escort. Then Iris and Kate timidly asked if they could cover their share of the debt with today's earnings. The alchemist, businesslike, cleared her throat. No pity. The sudden death of debtors would turn into great financial losses for them. The huntresses solemnly swore to protect their lives until they paid off every last coin. Sarasa clicked Kate on the forehead with a sly smile. The rescue would have to be worked off for a long time, and immediately sincerely admitted that she was counting on new joint expeditions. Iris, with tears in her eyes, replied that she herself sincerely hoped for new shared adventures. The girls froze, touched and unable to move. With loud crying, they threw themselves on the neck of their savior, and the collectors, smiling, watched them. But no one yet knew what awaited ahead. In the semi-darkness of the luxurious office, a mysterious man listened attentively to the report. "I see," he murmured quietly. A predatory smile spread across his face at the news of the new alchemist, and a shadow began to thicken over the distant village. Sarasa gasped with delight. Next to the shop, a familiar hunter waved his hand joyfully, inviting to buy a whole batch of ice bat fangs. With a rumble, the men dumped fresh, shiny trophies on the table, and the girls leaned over the rich loot, mesmerized. Sarasa stared confusedly at the slip of paper. The memory threw her back a few weeks. The familiar collector triumphantly burst into the shop with completed orders. The collector proudly laid out a whole pile of freshly completed orders before Sarasa on the counter. The girl recoiled from the shock. Barely a couple of days had passed, and the demand for her new gloves was pouring like a river. And then it dawned on her. The boy smiled warmly. Among the veterans, Sarasa's reputation was already running ahead of her. People simply trusted her talent. She looked stunned at the dozens of client names who were ready to pay blindly. Her cheeks flushed with emotion, and a sincere smile spread across her face. The gatherer threw a heavy sack over her shoulder and reminded her that now the whole guild was waiting for her work. Her boots creaked dully on the floor. The boy finished with the last argument. If such a thing is needed by Sarasa herself, then every collector will definitely want it. The girl slyly winked and immediately moved to bargaining. For such a number of clients, she lowered the price to 3,500 coins and suggested returning to business. She sincerely admitted that without the constant support of gatherers, her little shop would not last long. The boy cheerfully peeked out from behind the counter, as if urging it was time to get back to work. Sarasa nervously explained that paid delivery of ingredients would drive her into debt, so their cooperation was a profitable salvation for both. The deal was made instantly. The girl happily winked and promised to take care of his welfare in the future, and the gatherer readily accepted these terms. Encouraged by such support, the young man proudly tensed his muscles, promising to now give his all. After that, she was left alone. Thoughtfully twisting the vial in her hands, she doubted whether her cauldron would be enough for such a gigantic order. In the middle of the workshop, a massive black mountain majestically towered over everything. A gigantic alchemical cauldron seemed to merge with the floor. Sarasa did not hesitate, and poured an entire barrel of thick alchemical latex inside. She firmly grasped the wooden paddle and began to stir the mixture intensively, not letting it stop. The mixture thickened moment by moment, turning into an incredibly sticky, viscous mass. Amid the loud bubbling of the brew, the alchemist woman mentally rejoiced. She had prudently made large reserves of raw materials. It was time to prepare for crafting. The girl quickly put on a work apron, arranged wooden hand mannequins, and infused them with magic. With a playful smile, Sarasa confidently dipped the first form straight into the boiling mixture. The work heated up. To cheerful humming, she methodically soaked and dried the mannequins until a whole row of perfect finished gloves lined up on the table. Dry, wet, repeat. Sarasa joyfully dipped the glove into the boiling cauldron. The fabric greedily absorbed the thick magical liquid, as if it itself craved it. Exhausting routine, 200 repetitions, and still only a dozen pairs came out. Suddenly, the door creaked, and Larea happily rushed into the workshop to call her friend for lunch. Sarasa turned around with an empty gaze and a creepy smile, muttering that she had already known oblivion and was ready to ascend. Larea recoiled in panic upon seeing her friend surrounded by a whole forest of severed hands. The girl could not recover from the shock. Sarasa explained calmly what had happened and asked her to wait outside the door. The magical process could not be stopped halfway. Lorea's heart was still wildly pounding, but she finally exhaled with relief. These were ordinary wooden mannequins for alchemy. Eventually, Sarasa wearily wiped her brow in front of the huge basket, completely losing count of the finished products. All the gloves were neatly laid out to dry, and then the cycle started again. The girl doubled her efforts to stir the next batch in the cauldron. Realizing she had already performed over 1,000 manipulations, Sarasa cracked her numb shoulders and begged for a massage, while the amazed Larea counted the crazy 62 finished pairs. She threw the next pair of fresh gloves into the overflowing basket. The girl carried the heavy load to the yard, happily announcing that it was still too early to stop. She skillfully clipped the last pair on the clothespin. Done. The heroine thoughtfully fingered the rope, suspecting she had crafted too many pairs, simply because of their incredible durability. The girl quietly calmed herself. Future orders would more than cover all the material costs. She squinted skeptically, because from the outside it looked as if she was growing an army of zombies in the backyard. But no one peeks over the tall fence, so she happily walked off to have lunch. Dozens of pale gray gloves eerily swayed in the wind, seeing the tired craftswoman off to the house. Night fell. Two of her friends approached the shop. They cheerfully hummed, as if the taste was already in their mouths. The dark-haired girl joyfully raised her fist. They abruptly opened the door with the sign, "Closed," loudly announcing their return. The blonde accidentally glanced at the yard, and the words stuck in her throat. Rows of severed hands silently swung in the darkness. The hostess was just carrying a hot dish to the table when the whole house shook from a frantic double scream. The two girls tightly embraced, choking on tears from the intense fright. A little later, the alchemist gathered her friends in the shop, and did so as if hinting from the threshold. The conversation would be serious. She asked to borrow some wisdom, making the girls nervously swallow. And suddenly, she pulled out a box of luxurious pastries, a generous reward for whoever proposed a brilliant idea. Lorea paused for a moment and raised her hand, but immediately stopped, asking first to hear the context of the problem. The conversation hit a dead end, with the adventurers who recently dragged mountains of icy bat fangs to the shop. The hostess nodded and admitted. She put these materials to use by brewing 2 new products. Lorea confirmed that the locals greeted the novelties with such enthusiasm that their hearts were overwhelmed. The first invention was a summer veil. It reliably repelled any insects from the owner. The second was a straw hat with magical cooling. It just appeared and immediately became a hit among farmers dying from the summer heat. But the alchemist immediately grew gloomy. This income barely covered her past expenses on the expensive hide of the infernal grizzly. She knew perfectly well. Villagers pay for expensive things, not so much for benefit as out of kindness to support her shop. For the business to truly take off, she needed to stir up the cash flow and raise the wealth of the entire village. She loudly clapped her hands and bowed her head, begging the girls to save her with fresh ideas. The 4 girls at the table froze in deep thought. The blonde explained that villagers were accustomed to barter from childhood, so they hardly needed cash. The main poverty of the village was not in anything else. There was no proper work here, and money was brought only by outsiders. The blonde was shining brightly, suggesting to open her own shops and accommodate traveling guests in the yards. The manager approved her idea and pushed the pastry forward. Lorea, trembling with horror, exclaimed that the new establishments would kill her father's business, and the manager suddenly sharply realized where she had gone wrong. Someone handed Lorea a dessert, and she, without hesitation, began chewing it under the shocked glances of the dark-haired woman. But the dark-haired woman abruptly raised her hand. The manager demonstratively sipped tea, brushing off the blonde's next idea, and declared that the business should be run by the peasants themselves. Smiling contentedly, the manager playfully pushed another pastry toward Kate as well. The manager's face was illuminated by a brilliant idea. They just needed to hire locals for work and pay them in real money. The dark-haired woman did not waste a moment. She immediately caught on. The best investor with external capital in this village was the manager herself. For such a proposal, the girl received a double portion of pastries, and her eyes sparkled with delight. But the grand plans quickly ran into a problem. There was only one clever craftsman in the entire village, and he had an assistant. The girls racked their brains over a side job for the peasants so that it would not interfere with their work in the fields. Sarasa smiled and patted Lorea on the head. She was ready to forgive anything to such a sweetheart. Suddenly it dawned on them. The peasants would weave hats, Sarasa would cast cooling magic on them, and Lorea's father would sell the goods in the city. But no one would buy an ordinary farmer's hat, so a stylish design was urgently needed. Sarasa entrusted this mission to Kate, recalling her impeccable taste in kitchen decorating. The blonde blushed deeply, yet still confidently accepted the challenge. At the table, Sarasa warmly assured Kate that she was already eagerly awaiting her new little hat. Having a ready plan, Sarasa headed to the mayor and brazenly pulled 2 pastries from the table. She winked at her stunned friends, tossing it to them to figure out the rest themselves. The trio exchanged stunned, shocked glances. Just as her farewell sounded from behind the door, the girls screamed and rushed to play rock, paper, scissors. The dark-haired girl tensed to the limit, as if before a merciless confrontation, because in the box there were only 4 desserts, left for 3. The girl chatted casually with the locals, admiring the skillful work of the elderly craftswoman on the straw hat. She thoughtfully warmed her hands on a hot mug, and an idea for a large order was already maturing in her mind. Without much thought, she went straight to the village elder's residence. A barely audible breeze carefreely chased the fluff, as if there were no worries around. Over a cup of tea, the elder gladly embraced her initiative. His people were already extremely short of money. She listened attentively to his reasoning, without averting her gaze. But as soon as the conversation touched on the volume of work, The girl made an intriguing pause. The grandfather warned that village women only knew how to weave from straw, but that suited her perfectly. She enthusiastically proposed working on consignment, and this instantly puzzled the old man. Everything was simple. The peasants made the hats themselves and set their own prices. After that, she took the hats to her shop to apply special cooling charms. And only then, after the sale, she honestly gave the craftsmen all the money they had earned. The elder nodded approvingly upon hearing. She would accept both simple and expensive styles. But when the girl casually stated that her magic would raise the price of an ordinary hat from 500 to 5,500 coins, the grandfather instantly broke out in a cold sweat. With a loud scream, a female figure burst into the room and froze in a theatrical pose. The mayor blinked confusedly, trying to understand who would compensate the peasants' losses if the goods did not sell. The woman stepped into the light and sweetly apologized to Sarasa for the sudden intrusion. It was Erin, the mayor's daughter, who shamelessly eavesdropped at the door. She sternly jabbed a finger at her father and scolded him for doubting Sarasa's sincerity. Sarasa calmly laid out the rule of limits on stale goods, and Erin immediately grasped the very essence of financial risks. But when the old man still understood nothing, the daughter burst out shouting, "If it weren't for these rules, all the expenses for magic would fall solely on Sarasa's shoulders." Erin meaningfully raised a finger. She fiercely reminded her father that the work on magical items itself costs incredible money. Her plan was based on a buyback system. To put a new hat up for sale, the craftsman had to return and take back his old unsold goods. Erin slyly winked and added that thanks to this, peasants could get an enchanted item almost for nothing. Sarasa quickly calculated in her head. The scheme really allowed those who can count to save a decent amount. She only asked not to stop production after such maneuvers, and the mayor immediately agreed with relief. Sarasa smiled crookedly, perfectly understanding. Playing with prices is a complete gray area. Erin slightly tilted her head and, as if doubting, asked whether this plan would hit Sarasa herself. The alchemist fussed, waved her hands, and with a nervous laugh assured that she was doing just fine. Meanwhile, the man nearby was already calculating the profit. Just in case, he decided to keep the minimum price only outside the village. There, the goods could be sold for many times more expensive. Moreover, the layer of the ice bats turned out to be the best at hand. With such a source of raw materials, the trader was absolutely calm about his wallet. Erin's eyes sparkled with excitement, and she loudly vowed to sew the most beautiful hats for them. The old mayor stared confusedly ahead over his cup, barely keeping up with the guests' clever plans. It seemed that she had been running the village from behind the scenes all this time, and not her father at all. The girl authoritatively ordered all minor problems to be brought to her, and the old mayor was left confused at the table, about to continue sipping his tea. The project took off fully. Sarasa was already barely visible behind the mountain of finished products. A little later, near the mayor's residence, or rather Erin's estate itself, the workdays heated up. Since the money for the work was not given immediately, only good acquaintances agreed to work on credit. At the very start, only Els and Lorea's mother took up the needle, bringing the first masterful hats. Lorea joyfully informed the girls. Rumors about their profits had already spread throughout the village, so now the neighbors were also massively weaving hats. Everything went up at a crazy speed. For a regular straw hat, they asked 500 coins, and for one decorated with a ribbon, all 700. Merchant Darna took on selling their products also in southern straw. Sarasa worked inspiredly on the new design, sincerely happy that their business was helping the whole village. Besides the usual products, he now specially supplied them with fabrics and other materials for sewing. Sarasa froze in confusion, and not understanding, looked at her friend from head to toe in wonder. Suddenly, Sarasa blinked in surprise, asking why Lorea had put a colander on her head, and Lorea waved her hands indignantly. It turned out that it was a special double-layer helmet against moisture. The girl had developed it based on the advice of an acquaintance collector. Sarasa sincerely admired the skill with which such an unusual headdress was woven. When asked how she managed to weave such a complex structure, Lorea modestly admitted her great-grandmother helped with it. Sarasa was surprised because she had never seen her. The old woman had sick legs and hardly ever left the room. It turned out that she had woven more than half of all the hats, and the new opportunity to earn money herself had returned a genuine smile to her. Lorea looked gently at her friend and sincerely thanked her for everything. She smiled warmly, The new project had already worked and was now bringing everyone a good income. Her face was glowing with happiness. The efforts really had not been in vain. Conquered by the result, she quietly rejoiced for the girl who loved her great-grandmother so boundlessly. During a hike in the forest, the company suddenly noticed something strange. Where did so many newcomers come from all around? A moment later, and another client blocked her thoughts behind the counter. And then, everything fell into place. Hunters were flocking here en masse, due to loud rumors about the hell grizzly and the ice bats. At the door stood a boy exhausted from the road, with a heavy hiking backpack. He rolled his eyes at her so wildly that the girl involuntarily recoiled. She confusedly poked herself with a finger, immediately realizing this weirdo was definitely not local. The young man started panicking about a monster attack right from the doorstep, but those present only mocked him. For the locals, this threat had long since passed. The villagers laughed even louder. For them, former fears had long ago turned into everyday tall tales. The visiting young man froze in shock, hearing that the terrible attack no longer bothered anyone here. Suddenly the traveler went pale, as if he had sharply remembered something else. The girl just smiled calmly. Fortunately, there were no significant damages, and this unfortunate hero simply missed the most interesting part. The young man with a hiking backpack bowed low to Sarasa, warmly thanking her for saving the village and his parents. He smiled warmly at his savior. Sarasa quietly said that helping the village was only her duty. Lareya suddenly squinted and asked if the boy really came here just to say thank you. He immediately broke out in sweat and began awkwardly making excuses, stumbling over justifications due to his shock from the news. After regaining some composure, he gathered his thoughts and businesslike proposed a trade deal to Sarasa, relying on his mother's advice. The alchemist woman immediately figured out his intention, to profit from reselling her goods in southern Straug. The young man distrustfully stared at the price tag on the hats. The amount seemed suspiciously meager to him. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin, calculating in his head what profit the seasonal goods would bring. Sarasa slyly winked and explained that direct deliveries of materials from the Bat Cave allowed her to keep prices low and avoid losses. The boy listened attentively, while mentally weighing all the advantages of such cooperation. Slowly but surely, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. The opportunity seemed truly promising. Hearing this, the boy joyfully spread his hands and instantly agreed to cooperate. But Lareya sharply reminded him that this was not his only stop, and the unfortunate merchant blushed again and began to panic, begging for silence. Lareya puffed out her cheeks in displeasure. The transformation of Gretz into her father's competitor clearly annoyed the girl. Sarasa suggested to the merchant to exchange hats for the peasants, and at the very idea, he immediately perked up. The girl stopped his gesture, explaining that he could only sell what was currently in the shop. "You can count on me," exclaimed Gretz, and dashed out the door like a bullet. On the road, he smiled contentedly. The deal already smelled of a good profit. Soon he dragged a whole pile of straw hats to the shop, which greatly surprised both girls. For each finished item, he immediately paid the craftsman with ringing coins. Using old connections, Gretz went around the yards and personally asked neighbors to help with weaving. His bet on practicality paid off. The assortment expanded, which could meet any market demand. Having stuffed his backpack to the brim, the incredibly happy merchant set off on the road. While he was traveling, half of the payments to the peasants were agreed to be postponed. They had to take care of elves. Lareya continued to grumble discontentedly, but Sarasa gently contradicted her. This man brings real money to their village. The days dragged by too quickly, and summer quietly took over the valley. Darna sold out the entire batch in the south, and Gretz returned with a share of the profit. With a loud clink, he dropped the bags of coins. The blonde with the tablet joyfully reported to her friends. Their project of selling branded hats worked excellently. Hearing the joyful news, the friends screamed in shock and did not immediately believe in the success. Iris and Lareya comically burst into tears, recalling how much the feeling of their own uselessness oppressed them. Kate only shyly scratched her cheek, while the girls praised her capital-level design in turn. Although true wealth was still far away, the first ringing coins were already confidently flowing to the village. Inspired by success, Kate cheerfully announced the development of a new product, and just then, Iris cautiously asked for a moment of attention. Nervously swallowing the lump in her throat, the girl warned about troubling rumors. A suspicious trader appeared in the village. Sprawled on the sofa with a cigar, the new competitor was already preparing his move. Against the backdrop of unbearable summer heat, Sarasa rejoiced at the delivery, a massive refrigerator from Master Haberka. She carefully secured the cooling core inside. Then, without unnecessary movements, she inserted the glass panel. Just barely, and the camera was already swirling with frosty air. It remained only to apply moisture protection and, carrying it on her own back, drag this machine to the kitchen. Sarasa was sincerely impressed. The device worked perfectly and required no adjustments. To check, she hid several bowls of water in the freezer, and she herself began to cook syrup from dried fruits and sugar on the stove. As soon as the sweet aroma spread through the house, the curious Lorea immediately ran over. The thick mixture slowly dripped from the spoon, reluctant to let go. Unable to tear her gaze away, Lorea looked closer in wonder, just to see that snowy hill. Lorea's eyes lit up with excitement as soon as Sarasa offered her to try the summer dessert. For now, the water in the bowls was frozen, solid as a stone. With a snap of her fingers, Sarasa turned the ice into a fluffy pile of snow, and Lorea couldn't hold back. She gasped in surprise. Sarasa proudly extended the bowl with icy crumbs, boasting about the new dessert from her teacher. The thick syrup with pieces of fruit generously poured over the cold mound. Sarasa enthusiastically began preparing a few more portions, explaining that this was the perfect summer training for mana control. As soon as the sweetness was ready, it was immediately placed in front of the delighted Lorea. Lorea enjoyed devouring the dessert, squinting with pleasure. The cold sweetness tasted perfect. With a sly smile, Sarasa advised eating the dessert as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a funny idea flashed through her mind. Lorea instantly froze in shock, not lowering her spoon. The girl greedily crushed the icy crumbs, spoonful by spoonful, while Sarasa just smiled, as if she was ready to prepare as many portions as needed. She suddenly jerked from the pain in her temples and screamed. While Sarasa calmly watched her reaction, the alchemist calmly laid everything out. This was not an illness, but a normal phenomenon that just needed to be waited out. Lorea quietly whimpered, almost crying, holding her head. To her completely logical outrage, Sarasa only awkwardly scratched the back of her head. She really wanted her friend to feel this pain on herself at least once. The girl with pigtails quickly emptied the bowl and immediately demanded more, just at the moment when Kate and Lorea returned to the shop. Sarasa turned around, sincerely greeting her friends. She placed a new portion of ice with fruits on the table and gently advised the little one to protect her stomach from too much sweetness. Kate, exhausted by the heat, blissfully put her face under the stream of cold air. The girl was beaming. The powerful air conditioner that Sarasa had crafted from their trophies, the fangs of ice bats, was working flawlessly. Iris and Kate wilted from the heat and enviously stared at the cold treat, silently begging for a portion themselves. With a sly smile, the little conspirator incited her friends. Supposedly, this dessert tastes best if eaten as quickly as possible. The smiling alchemist set off to prepare dessert for the newcomers as well. Kate clenched her fists so brightly that her heart fluttered with joyful anticipation. But suddenly, a giant, icy mountain solemnly plopped onto the table. So the little one immediately began devouring it, and Kate froze in shock, staring at this chunk. The prank succeeded. Now Kate gloomily sipped the hot drink, recovering from the hellish pain in her temples. Sarasa and the little one playfully stuck out their tongues, openly mocking the naive dreamer. Her recently torn-out, insane scream from the frozen brain seemed to still echo over the roof of the shop. Realizing that everyone was in on the conspiracy, Kate looked suspiciously at Lorea and asked how she had miraculously avoided this trap. Savoring the delicate, icy sweetness, the girls squinted from true bliss. Slurping the sweet, icy dessert, the girls admitted that after such comfort, they would no longer be able to spend the night in ordinary inns. The secret lay in the special blankets gifted by Sarasa. They did not steam, but pleasantly cooled the body during sleep. Sarasa smiled warmly and brushed off talks about the high cost of the gifts. She simply wanted to improve the lives of her people. From such care, the girls joyfully shone and promised in chorus to work even harder, prepare healthy food, and make the shop famous worldwide. The sight of this unexpected burst of enthusiasm made Sarasa realize a simple truth. Good working conditions and happy workers are the foundation of successful management. Sudden appearance. Sarasa confidently leaned on the shop counter, and at that moment, a golden shower of coins poured down around her and her friends. A ringing coin flew upward. Iris worriedly recalled the rumors. A suspicious merchant had come to the village. smooth, and from head to toe completely adorned with jewels. At that moment, the door burst open, letting in a joyful hunter with a sack of fresh game. To the cheerful jingle of the doorbell, he greeted familiarly. The girls looked at him bewildered, and the guest instantly became embarrassed. He already understood that he had interrupted a serious conversation. Sarasa hurried to ease the tension and explained that they were just discussing that very visiting merchant. The boy's tone sharply shifted, and he offered to reveal the whole truth about that scoundrel. His gaze became heavy, gloomy, as if dark clouds had gathered within it. The girls quickly pushed the tables aside, poured tea, and Sarasa tensed, staring in anticipation of the story. It turned out that the new competitor was buying up the catch at inflated prices, luring away all the locals, so the shelves in Sarasa's shop began to rapidly empty. Sarasa did not move an inch. She held the cup steadily and calmly, while her friends boiled with indignation. Iris slammed her fist on the table indignantly, demanding justice, despite Sarasa helplessly admitting, the customers are simply looking for profit. The blonde squinted discontentedly and coldly cut in that he should at least warn about his visits in advance. The conversation at the table did not subside. The young man with a headband tensed up. He had to report something else important. The girl opposite clenched her fists in anger, still not forgiving the scoundrel for destroying their local hat business. Despite her outrage, the boy explained that he decided to visit the house of this merchant. There he caught him in an extremely friendly conversation with a bunch of unknown people in robes. What he saw instantly dispelled one suspicion in his mind. The young man's face became focused and overly serious. Suddenly, the room seemed to become harder to breathe in. He revealed the whole truth. These strangers are real bandits, and at this news everyone present froze. Bandits? In our village? The girls screamed in horror. The blonde's face darkened with anxiety, but the boy quickly dispelled the tension. He followed the thugs and made sure they had already left the village. A little girl peeked out from behind the cup and asked if that merchant was working in cahoots with the bandits. Night hung outside the shop windows. The girls tried to understand the competitor's logic. Why buy goods at a price higher than the market and voluntarily give up their own profit? Considering the delivery costs, he should have been at a loss altogether. A thought flashed. He simply broke the contract for the fangs, and now was frantically snooping around to urgently cover the shortage. Sarasa thoughtfully propped her chin. She assumed it was more profitable for the merchant to overpay now than to pay a huge penalty to his client. Or he was counting on profiting from the summer price jump. But when the plan went awry, he decided to artificially create a shortage by buying everything indiscriminately. However, none of these commercial versions explained the attack by armed bandits. Sarasa sighed heavily. Sarasa doubted. These fangs were valued far beyond just ordinary market raw materials. Her eyes suddenly widened with a terrible suspicion. It was revenge. The little girl trembled with fear, unable to comprehend who would even think of targeting Sarasa. Another girl pressed her hands to her chest in confusion, swearing that they had never crossed anyone's path. At the table, the girls pondered the motives of unknown enemies. Some outsider was benefiting by acting out of blind hatred. Lorea shuddered, suddenly realizing the terrible truth. The real target was her father. At this thought, her fist clenched against the table with a crunch. The dark-haired friend panicked and awkwardly tried to turn what she heard into a clumsy joke. The girls froze at the table, anxiety rippling through them like a wave. The worried friends exchanged confused glances, not knowing how to help with the trouble. Someone's palm gently but decisively grasped Lorea's wrist. Kate awkwardly apologized for her thoughtless words, while tearful Lorea trembled with fear for her father. Sarasa smiled radiantly and gently encouraged her upset friend. The girls agreed on one thing: the father must be warned immediately and kept away from the village for his own safety. Wiping tears from her eyes, Lorea asked again if this would really help, and received a warm smile in return. The blonde-haired friend gently assured that she would fight any bandits if they dared to come. A gloomy memory from the past flashed before her eyes, but the girl instantly dismissed it, and with fighting spirit promised to send the scoundrels straight to the moon. Meanwhile, somewhere in the complete darkness, a sinister, silent silhouette had already frozen. The girl froze, completely confused. Her fingers gripped the fabric tightly. Silence fell in the room. Sarasa gently, yet firmly pressed her friend to herself. Suddenly, the alchemist flared up with anger and swore she would send the offenders straight to the moon. Tears of gratitude burst from Lorea's eyes. A little later, the girls gathered for tea to finally make a plan to fight the brazen merchant. Sarasa raised a pointer and authoritatively suggested, strike the enemy with his own weapon. Sharply raise their own purchase prices. At first, the friends were afraid of losses, but very quickly realized customers would come anyway. A reliable reputation would keep them. The friends together let out a dramatic scream, as if overwhelmed by a wave of fear from such a risky stunt. Then, Sarasa cold-bloodedly presented the harsh mathematics of alchemy. Every second attempt to brew a potion ends with the cauldron exploding, and that's why their work is so expensive. She confidently clenched her fist and proudly declared that she was a student of Ophelia Millis herself, so it simply did not suit her to fail. Hearing this name, the girls together stared wide-eyed in shock. Their joint shocked scream, "Ophelia Millis!" almost blew the roof off the shop. The brunette slammed her hand on the table with a bang, choking on shock. She had just realized that it was indeed about Ophelia Millis, an alchemist of the highest class. This name thundered far beyond the guild's borders. Ophelia was a living legend and a true elite among masters. Their acquaintance blinked naively, wondering if this person was really that outstanding. In response, the girls just silently stared into space, digesting the scale of what they had heard. Here the Ophelia fan finally lost it. She wildly waved her hands and shouted that this was the greatest person on the planet. She clenched her fist, and a fanatical fire burned in her eyes. Later the emotions subsided. The group sat down for tea, and the conversation again turned to the urgent problem: competition with the brazen merchant. The plan was decisive: to relentlessly hunt bats and flood the market with fangs, oversaturating the supply. A sinister smile spread across the young alchemist's face. She decided to check which would burn faster, the monster population or the competitor's capital. Together with the local collectors, she could get hundreds of tusks daily, methodically draining all the money from the enemy's wallet. The friends shuddered from that eerie prudence, pressed fearfully against the backs of the chairs, and froze in their seats. Night fell, and from the shop windows came her cheerful assurances. Supposedly, it was just a joke, but the guests no longer believed her. As soon as everyone left, she sank heavily into the semi-darkness and froze with an absolutely exhausted, serious face. A sign reading, "Closed," hung lonely on the door. The closed sign on the shop door swung dully. Sarasa sat alone in the semi-darkness, staring into emptiness. Memory mercilessly brought up the most terrible day: bloodied palms pierced by an arrow, and a stranger's scream that the parents had been killed by bandits. But the past had to remain in the past. Already in the morning, she was smiling warmly at the next hunter behind the counter. Coins clinked loudly as they fell into the cash register. Lorea was genuinely happy. Their risky plan to raise purchase prices worked brilliantly. Everyone got richer. The local collectors now had enough, so they could stop economizing on themselves. The tavern was bursting at the seams with the crowd, and Sarasa was only patiently waiting for her main competitor to take the bait. The door suddenly burst open. Out of breath, Iris blurted from the threshold that the competitor had also raised prices, and the young owner nodded with satisfaction. She chuckled quietly and ominously. The girls eagerly told how the greedy buyer raised their payments by as much as 50%, arrogantly rattling coins right in front of their noses. The man was firmly convinced. He had finally cornered Sarasa and left her without a single drop of valuable goods. The huntresses exchanged worried glances, but the alchemist only burst into sly laughter. The overconfident fool had jumped into her perfect trap himself. Sarasa calmly agreed that the true target of this revenge, it seemed, was indeed her. Her face hid in the shadows, and a predatory smile of agreement spread across her lips. Someone slammed their palm on the table, announcing the next stage of the plan for tomorrow, while the girl in the beret stubbornly continued to take notes. Behind her overly bright cheerfulness lurked the same ominous grimace, and her friend nearby anxiously asked if everything was really all right. A moment, and she cheerfully raised her fist, asking for support from the team. The girls responded with a loud yes.